Hello. Today we're going to dive into the story of one of the most infamous cannibals in history. This is the tale of a man who was once known as a bright young boy with a love for poetry and classical music. But a tragic childhood twisted his fate, transforming him into one of Britain's most terrifying criminals. During his time in prison, instead of repenting, this killer became even more ruthless. He murdered 3 fellow inmates. And what stands out is that most of his victims were individuals with a history of child abuse. You won't believe that he once spent 9 hours torturing one of them to death. There were even rumors that he ate part of the victim's brain. His gruesome acts made him the nightmare of every prisoner, and his name was spoken in hushed tones of terror. For security reasons, British authorities had no choice but to isolate him in solitary confinement. As of today, he has spent 39 years in solitary, breaking the record for the longest period of solitary confinement in British history. So who is this notorious murderer? What kind of childhood did he endure that turned him into such a vengeful beast? And why does he harbor such deep hatred toward child abusers? In 1953, in the city of Liverpool, England, a boy named Robert Maudsley was born into a poverty-stricken family with a total of 13 children. With so many mouths to feed, his parents struggled to provide for them all. Unable to cope with the financial burden, they were forced to send several of their children to an orphanage, including Robert. At the orphanage, he was well taken care of by the nuns. But what Robert didn't realize was that those days in the orphanage would be the happiest and warmest moments of his entire life. When he was 8 years old, his parents unexpectedly took him back home. At that age, Robert longed for the love of his family, especially the gentle embrace of his mother and the kind gaze of his father. But what awaited him was far from what he had hoped for. Returning home marked the beginning of years filled with darkness and suffering. Robert's father was a short-tempered and violent man. Any minor mistake or trivial argument could trigger his rage, and he would take it out on his children. He beat them mercilessly with his fists, his belt, and sometimes even a thick wooden stick. Even worse, instead of protecting Robert, his mother joined in, subjecting him to both physical abuse and emotional neglect. Many times, Robert tried to shield his younger sisters from his father's brutal punishments, but his defiance only led to even more severe beatings. Every act of resistance only brought him harsher punishments. His childhood was a relentless cycle of fear and pain, devoid of any sense of safety or love. Beyond the physical abuse, Robert's father would often lock his children in a dark room as a cruel form of punishment. The long, cold nights spent alone in that room became traumatic memories that haunted him for the rest of his life. In the worst instance, Robert was locked in that room for 6 whole months. Fortunately, one of Robert's younger sisters, with her intelligence and bravery, decided to report the family's abuse to social services. Thanks to her courage, authorities intervened and rescued Robert from the hellish nightmare that was his home. After being removed from his biological family, Robert was placed in a foster home. He hoped that this would be his chance at peace, but reality proved otherwise. His life in foster care was even worse. At the age of 16, unable to endure the abuse any longer, Robert ran away and began living on the streets. Years of relentless violence had hardened his mind and twisted his psyche. As a homeless teenager, he quickly fell into drug addiction. To fund his addiction, he turned to sex work. It was during this time that Robert took his first steps down the dark path that would define the rest of his life. One time, Robert's client was a construction worker. After their transaction was over, the man didn't just boast arrogantly about his past acts of child abuse. He pulled out a series of photographs showing himself torturing children and proudly displayed them to Robert. At that moment, those images triggered the most painful memories of Robert's childhood. The beatings, the abuse, and the unbearable suffering he had endured as a child. In an instant, all the suppressed rage that had been simmering inside him exploded. Overcome with uncontrollable fury, Robert strangled the construction worker to death. From that moment on, he fully understood that he had become a murderer. After committing the crime, Robert didn't run. Instead, he walked straight into a police station and turned himself in. He was sentenced to life in prison and sent to serve his time behind bars. However, even in prison, it was impossible to suppress the monster inside him. He frequently suffered from severe mental instability, and eventually, authorities transferred him to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. But no one could have predicted that it was in this very hospital that Robert would commit the crime that would forever cement his name as one of the most terrifying figures in British history. When Robert first arrived at the psychiatric hospital, he appeared to be well-behaved and didn't cause any trouble. But in 1977, he set his sights on a man named David Francis. Robert's reason for targeting David was simple. He had discovered that David was a child abuser, something Robert despised with every fiber of his being. Consumed by uncontrollable hatred, he decided that he couldn't let David go unpunished. He even convinced another patient to join him in carrying out a murder. Together, they waited until David was taking his afternoon nap. They slipped into his room, barricaded the door with a wooden bed plank, and tied him up using cassette tape. Then, Robert and his accomplice began torturing him. The brutal session lasted for 9 straight hours. It wasn't until much later that the hospital staff and prison guards realized that something horrific had taken place. When the police broke into the room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Blood splattered everywhere, and David's skull had been split open. Robert sat calmly next to the corpse, holding a spoon covered in blood. This chilling detail soon led to rumors that Robert had eaten part of David's brain. While no solid evidence ever confirmed the claim, the sheer brutality of the murder made it a widely discussed topic, drawing massive media attention. From that moment on, Robert was branded with a new name, the Cannibal. Following the incident, he was convicted of another murder charge and transferred to Wakefield Prison, also known as Monster Mansion, the most secure prison in Britain. This facility was reserved for the country's most dangerous criminals, including death row inmates and those guilty of the most heinous crimes. However, after hearing about what Robert had done at the psychiatric hospital, even the hardened criminals of Wakefield were filled with fear. Inside prison, Robert became infamous among inmates, who started calling him the Brain Eater. Within just a few weeks, tales of his horrifying acts spread like wildfire, turning him into a nightmarish legend in the prison world. Initially, authorities believed that with the highest level of security, Robert would no longer be able to cause trouble. But they had no idea that within less than a year, he would launch another terrifying killing spree, one so horrifying that most people would struggle to comprehend it. One of his targets was an inmate named Salnay, who was serving time for murdering his wife. Despite having heard about Robert's terrifying reputation, Salnay didn't believe the rumors. He dismissed them as exaggerated prison tales and paid little attention to the warnings. So when Robert casually invited him into his cell, Salnay didn't hesitate, completely unaware that he was walking straight to his death. The moment Salnay stepped inside, Robert pounced. He tied Salnay up before the man, even had a chance to react or defend himself. As Salnay attempted to scream for help, Robert quickly gagged him. Then, he took a makeshift weapon, a spoon he had sharpened into a blade, and brutally killed his victim. Once it was over, he dragged Salnay's body under his bed and hid it there. Robert didn't stop there. He slipped into the cell of another prisoner, Bill Roberts, a man convicted of sexually abusing a 7-year-old girl. Standing face-to-face with someone he despised, Robert didn't hesitate. He grabbed a makeshift weapon and plunged it straight into Bill's head, then slammed his skull against the wall repeatedly. The force was so brutal that it cracked Bill's skull wide open. After killing 2 men in a row, Robert didn't bother to flee. Instead, he calmly walked into the guard's office, placed his weapon on the table, and said in an eerily composed tone, "At the next roll call, you'll need to cross 2 names off your list." His words left the guard stunned. It wasn't until reports came in from other inmates that they realized Robert had indeed taken 2 lives. According to witnesses, he had actually planned to kill 7 people that day, but for some reason, he stopped after Salnay and Bill. The incident cemented Robert's reputation as one of Britain's most dangerous prisoners, earning him yet another life sentence. From that moment on, Wakefield Prison was shrouded in an eerie, chilling atmosphere. Stories of Robert spread like wildfire among the inmates, becoming a hot topic of conversation. Old-timers recounted the events to newcomers like a vivid horror movie, and Robert Maudsley's name became a dark legend in British history. To ensure the safety of other prisoners, the warden of Wakefield Prison spent £50,000 to construct a special cell in the basement just for Robert. It measured 5.5 meters by 4.5 meters and was entirely encased in bulletproof glass. Inside, there was only a concrete bed, a small table made of compressed cardboard, and a toilet bolted to the floor. Beyond basic necessities like food and hygiene, Robert had no other activities to occupy him. He was allowed 1 hour of yard time each day, but for the remaining 23 hours, he was confined to his isolated cell. A dedicated team of guards monitored him constantly, and whenever he moved, 6 guards accompanied him to ensure absolute security. Living in complete isolation for so long pushed Robert's psyche to the brink. He craved human interaction and connection. Over the years, he repeatedly requested to return to the general population cells to live among other inmates, but every request was denied. By March 2000, Robert decided to break his silence and wrote a letter to the prison warden. In it, he pleaded for better living conditions and asked for personal items like books, cassette tapes, or a sleeping bag to help him cope with the loneliness. He suggested being allowed to play video games, watch TV, or write letters to his family to pass the time. If none of those were possible, he requested a cyanide pill to end his life and put an end to his suffering. The prison, however, rejected all of Robert's requests. By the time he turned 68, on a Christmas season, he submitted another appeal, begging to be let out of his solitary cell for a chance to interact with the outside world. That case is still awaiting a decision. Robert had previously asked to rejoin the general population, but the prison staunchly refused to allow a dangerous killer like him to mingle with other inmates. They believed that after so much time in isolation, his behavior had become too unpredictable and uncontrollable, and they weren't willing to take the risk of releasing him into the general population. This time, not only did the prison deny Robert's request, but they also stripped him of his right to appeal altogether. That meant, barring some unforeseen event, he would spend the rest of his days in that isolated cell. Since 1973, Robert has been imprisoned for 52 years. Due to his prolonged isolation, he began forming bonds with the small creatures in his cell. People often saw him whispering in the corner of his room, seemingly talking to insects, cockroaches, rats, and other critters. Because of his dangerous nature, Robert hasn't had a haircut in over a decade. However, the story of this so-called cannibal captured the attention of the online community when it was covered by international media. Many internet users started asking questions. While keeping Robert in prison for life might be necessary, is isolating him in a solitary cell like this too cruel? Some even argued that a death sentence might be more humane than this form of confinement. Amid these debates, British authorities offered no comments. Yet, one can imagine that for a cold-blooded killer with violent instincts like Robert, isolating him might be the only way to ensure the safety of others. Showing leniency toward Robert could, in fact, be cruelty to everyone else. We can't wait for more tragedies to happen before feeling regret. By then, it would be far too late. Despite his severe psychological issues, Robert possesses an exceptional intellect and remarkable musical talent. Had it not been for the tragedies of his childhood, his life might not have ended so grimly. If his parents had treated him better, or even simply left him to grow up in the orphanage, perhaps this killer's fate could have been entirely different. The story of Robert Maudsley leaves us with much to reflect on about the roles of family, education, and society in shaping a person's life.
Today, we dive into the shocking story of Lin Hong Tan, the woman infamously known as the Black Widow of Gansu. With her mesmerizing beauty and cunning psychological manipulation online, she turned sweet words into deadly traps. Her unfortunate victims not only lost their fortunes, but also their lives in her ruthless schemes alongside her gang. Since the emergence of the internet, online romance has become a widespread phenomenon. Everyone dreams of finding love in the virtual world. However, behind the sweet facade lies unpredictable dangers, sometimes leading to devastating consequences, even death. Lin Hong Tan was born in 1970 in Baiyin City, Gansu Province. From a young age, she was renowned for her striking beauty. As she grew older, her allure became even more captivating, causing many men to fall helplessly in love with her. However, she was never interested in decent men. Instead, she was drawn to rebellious and reckless individuals. In 1995, at the age of 25, she started dating a notorious gangster. This relationship dragged her into a world of crime from which she could never escape. One day, her boyfriend got involved in a major gang fight. During a police intervention, he used a dumbbell, provided by Lin Hong Tan, to attack an officer, nearly killing him. As a result, her boyfriend was sentenced to life in prison, while she received a 6-year sentence for aiding and abetting the crime. After serving her time, she struggled to find stable employment and fell into the world of gambling, particularly mahjong. It was in these underground gambling dens that she met Wang Li Guo. The two quickly fell for each other and moved in together. The path of crime. After some time, Lin Hong Tan noticed strange behavior in Wang. At first, she suspected he was seeing another woman, but the truth was far worse. He was part of a gang specializing in armed robbery. This group consisted of Wang, twin brothers Shang Renmeng and Shang Renhu, along with 2 unemployed criminals, Lu Zhendo and Lu Dongrong. Initially, they feared Lin Hong Tan would leave after discovering their crimes. However, to their surprise, she was thrilled and decided to join them. Her arrival changed the gang's strategy completely. Instead of relying solely on robbery, they began using romantic traps, manipulating victims through love and affection before striking. By 2005, online chat rooms had become widely popular. The gang saw this as the perfect opportunity to expand their hunting grounds, and Lin Hong Tan, with her stunning looks and persuasive skills, became the ideal bait. Their first target was Chen, a young man from a poor background. Chen was hard-working, had graduated from university, and secured a job as a civil servant. In his free time, he enjoyed chatting online, which is how he encountered Lin Hong Tan. Her beauty and charming personality quickly enchanted Chen. Their online conversations soon led to real-life meetings, growing increasingly frequent. Eventually, he was completely captivated by her, unknowingly walking into a deadly trap. One evening, while drinking together, Chen succumbed to temptation and accompanied Lin Hong Tan to her home. The moment he stepped inside, 2 strong men rushed out and restrained him. In that instant, Chen realized he had fallen into a trap with no escape. Terrified, he begged for his life. After searching him, they only found a phone and 300 yuan in his pocket. Furious at the small amount, the gang mercilessly beat him until he was barely breathing. Understanding their anger was driven by money, Chen desperately tried to stay calm and proposed calling his family to request a ransom on the condition that they spared his life. At first, the gang was skeptical, but after a brief discussion, they saw it as an easy way to make a large sum. They handed him the phone, and he shakily called his father, fabricating a story about needing an urgent deposit of 50,000 yuan for his company. On the other end, his father was silent, overwhelmed by worry. The family was already struggling to pay off loans from Chen's university education, and now another enormous debt loomed over them. Despite the financial burden, a father's love and hope for his son's future prevailed. He desperately borrowed money from various sources, managing to gather 10,000 yuan, which he then transferred to the designated account. However, once the gang received the money, they broke their promise. Instead of sparing Chen's life, they brutally beat him to death, and disposed of his body in a desolate area near a water plant on the outskirts of Shi City. This marked the gang's first major payday. Compared to their previous 3 heists, this was their most successful operation yet. Encouraged by the outcome, Lin Hongtan and her gang used the stolen money to purchase 2 handguns, preparing for even bigger crimes in the future. However, before they could execute their next plan, internal conflicts began to arise. Some members grew resentful, feeling the profits were not evenly distributed. Meanwhile, Lin Hongtan's online scams were becoming less effective as recent targets lacked substantial wealth. Frustration and anxiety mounted, leading to a heated argument one drunken night. Zhang Ren Meng, in a fit of rage, openly criticized Lin Hongtan, triggering an explosive confrontation between them, the next scheme. Following the dispute, Lin Hongtan, Wang, and their close accomplice, Liu Dongrong, temporarily relocated to Baiyin to lay low. But as their funds dwindled, they resorted to their old methods, searching for victims online. This time, they set their sights on Lin, a middle-aged circus performer. Despite his modest background, Lin boasted about being a wealthy businessman in chat rooms. Seizing the opportunity, Lin Hongtan arranged to meet him. However, when they finally met, the gang was dismayed to find only 200 yuan in Lin's possession. Enraged and feeling cheated, they stabbed him before abandoning him in a desolate field. Fortunately, a kind passerby discovered Lin and rushed him to a hospital, saving his life. Unfortunately, the injuries were so severe that he suffered permanent disabilities. Meanwhile, Zhang Renmeng, Zhang Renhu, and Lu Zhendo had moved to Xi'an in search of new opportunities. They targeted a man named Wang, who had just withdrawn cash from a bank. Tracking him to Beihuoxing and Baixinguan, they shot him dead and made off with 16,000 yuan. With this money, they planned to return to Lanzhou to divide the loot before celebrating the Lunar New Year. But upon returning, Zhang Renmeng only distributed 2,000 yuan to each member. This caused tensions to reach their breaking point, with suspicions and resentment growing within the group. At the same time, Zhang Renmeng learned that Lin Hongtan's group was in Baiyin and was at high risk of exposure, which could implicate him as well. Realizing the danger, he had no choice but to call Lin Hongtan and her gang back. After a period of separation, the criminal syndicate of Zhang Renmeng, Lin Hongtan, and Wang Liguo reunited once more. This reunion carried both high hopes and immense pressure, as their previous schemes had drained their financial resources. Lin Hongtan continued to exploit her beauty and acting skills, posing as an innocent woman in search of a husband. She placed marriage advertisements in local newspapers to lure wealthy men. However, the men who responded were mostly poor, and the only financially stable one turned out to be part of another gang of 3 criminals, causing the plan to fail completely. Frustrated, the group decided to abandon this scheme and shift to a new approach. A month passed without finding a viable target. Zhang Renmeng grew impatient. One night, in a drunken rage, he furiously berated the group for failing to make money. At the peak of his anger, he pulled out a gun and threatened Wang Liguo, who was trying to calm him down. The tension in the room reached its breaking point. But before Zhang could react, the others quickly took advantage of his lapse in concentration and disarmed him. From that moment, cracks began to form within the group. Even his own brother sided against him. Now isolated and without support, Zhang Renmeng had no choice but to leave. Meanwhile, Liu Dongrong, disgusted by the murders and manipulative tactics, also decided to walk away in search of a more peaceful life. Lin Hongtan's deadly trap. Now only Wang Liguo and Lin Hongtan remained. The two continued their crimes, refining their tactics to become even more ruthless. In 2006, Lin Hongtan met a man named Huang online. After chatting for some time, she learned that Huang had moved from Guangdong to Gansu to open a pharmacy. Most importantly, he owned a luxurious Mitsubishi Pajero, making him the perfect target. Sensing an opportunity, Hong devised a plan. Using her seductive appearance and sweet words, she lowered Huang's guard. In their video chats, she frequently teased and flirted, keeping him both anxious and intrigued. Eventually, Huang agreed to meet her in person. Their first meeting took place at a bar in Lanzhou. There, Hong employed her usual tactics, getting him drunk and using affectionate gestures to weaken his defenses. However, Huang remained cautious and politely declined her invitation to her home, leaving Hong disappointed. Unwilling to give up, Hong persisted in arranging another meeting. This time, her plan worked. As the Lunar New Year approached, she pretended to be sad about returning to her hometown, making Huang worry that he might never see her again. On January 24, 2006, Huang finally let his guard down and agreed to visit Hong's home. That night, Huang arrived in high spirits, eager to see the beautiful woman he had fantasized about. But instead of a romantic evening, he was greeted by 3 dangerous criminals ready to take his life. Huang walked into the apartment completely, unaware of the trap awaiting him. The moment the door closed, 3 men emerged from the shadows. Before he could react, they seized him, tied him up, and ransacked his pockets, wallet, and even his prized Mitsubishi Pajero. Every valuable item, including the 20,000 yuan in his possession, was stolen, but they didn't stop there. Upon discovering that Huang had a significant amount in his bank account, they pressured him to reveal his PIN. Terrified, Huang complied. Within hours, they had emptied 80,000 yuan from his account. Now that they had taken everything, Huang was of no further use to them. Without hesitation, they brutally stabbed him to death with a sharp fruit knife. His body was wrapped and dumped near Shaoxihe Park in Lanzhou to erase any trace of the crime. The Mitsubishi Pajero was left near the scene to mislead the police. A month later, Huang's body was discovered, but since he was from another province, the police struggled to determine where he had been murdered. With no leads from the abandoned car, the case quickly reached a dead end, a trail of crimes. Seeing that the police were not pursuing the case further, Lin Hongtan and Wang Li Guo resumed their brutal crimes. Hong, with her alluring beauty and cunning nature, continued playing the role of a deadly seductress to trap wealthy men. One evening at a bar, Hong spotted a young man dressed in luxury, adorned with expensive accessories, making him the next target. After a few flirtatious exchanges, the man agreed to leave the bar with her. However, things didn't go as planned. Instead of taking her to his home, he drove to a private apartment. As soon as they arrived, 2 other men appeared. Hong immediately realized she had walked into a trap herself. These men were drug addicts and sex fiends. She was tortured the entire night before being dumped on the street the next morning. This failure was a costly lesson for her. Determined to recover, the gang set their sights on Liu, a wealthy yet boastful businessman. Once again, Hong used her sweet words and beauty to lure him in. They agreed to meet on the night of June 8, 2006, at a high-end bar in Lanzhou. The moment they met, Liu was captivated by Hong's beauty. After an enjoyable evening, he eagerly agreed to accompany her home, but instead of romance, what awaited him was a deadly ambush. The moment he stepped inside, he was bound and brutally beaten to death. The next afternoon, Liu's wife, unable to reach him, reported his disappearance to the police. During their investigation, authorities discovered that Liu had made multiple calls to a mysterious phone number before he vanished. However, this number had been deactivated since June 9, 2006, making it difficult to trace the owner. With no other leads, the police turned to the phone company's records. Their search revealed that this mysterious number had been in frequent contact with 2 other numbers, one of which belonged to Liu. Based on the gathered data, the police suspected that the remaining number could belong to another victim. crucial clue. After the case had reached a deadlock and unexpected leads surfaced, the police decided to call the mysterious phone number they had discovered. Fortunately, a screenshot revealed that the owner of this number was a man named Ding Bao. Without hesitation, they summoned Ding Bao for questioning. At the police station, Ding Bao admitted that the phone number belonged to a woman named Xiao Yue, whom he had met online. According to him, Xiao Yue was not only physically attractive, but also incredibly charming in conversation. He had fallen deeply in love with her and had even considered proposing. However, all his plans crumbled when Xiao Yue suddenly disappeared without a trace. When the police informed him that she might be a dangerous murderer, Ding Bao was in complete shock. After a few moments of contemplation, he let out a sigh of relief, realizing that he had narrowly escaped becoming her next victim. During the interrogation, Ding Bao provided the police with a valuable piece of information. Xiao Yue had used a Lenovo phone. This detail was significant because at the time, retail stores often required customers to register their personal information on warranty cards when purchasing mobile phones. Recognizing the potential breakthrough, the police launched an investigation at Lenovo retail stores in Baiyun and Lanzhou. They meticulously examined warranty records and the transaction receipts to track down the suspect's identity. After days of relentless effort, they finally found a warranty card that perfectly matched the clues from the case. The information on the warranty card identified the suspect as Lin Hongtan. Along with this, the police obtained her home address and national identification number. Armed with this critical information, the authorities immediately devised a plan to capture Hong. On August 25, 2006, they launched a surprise raid on an apartment within the Shipyard Residential District in Qilihe, Lanzhou. There, they easily apprehended Hong and her two accomplices, Lu Zhendo and Wang Li Guo. Based on their confessions, the police quickly tracked down and arrested the remaining gang members, including Zhang Renming, Zhang Renhu, and Liu Dong. The entire criminal network was dismantled, finally bringing hope for justice to the victims. On June 10, 2008, the trial of the 6 criminals, including the mastermind Lin Hongtan, commenced. The trial lasted for 3 days due to the sheer number of crimes committed by the gang. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, leaving no room for the accused to deny their guilt. In the end, the court sentenced all 6 criminals to death for their brutal crimes. The verdict was not only a punishment for their atrocities, but also a warning to anyone considering a life of crime. On March 4, 2010, the death sentences were carried out. This marked the end of Lin Hongtan and her gang, bringing an era of terror to a close and restoring peace to society. The case was officially closed, but its echoes continued to resonate, leaving lasting lessons for the world. The Beauty Queen, Crime Boss, a title that seemed to belong only in fictional stories, became a grim reality, proving that behind a flawless mask can lie unimaginable darkness.
On August 9, 1999, in Anhai Town, Xinjiang City, Fujian Province, China, a particularly heinous murder case took place. The deputy general manager of the Hengen Group, Wu Shijie, along with his wife and 2 beautiful daughters, were brutally murdered in their own home. Even more bizarre, just a few months prior, his eldest son had also passed away. Due to the severity of the case, the Fujian Provincial Public Security Bureau and the Xinjiang City Public Security Bureau quickly assembled an investigation team of more than 60 officers to solve the crime. They traveled across 16 provinces, 36 counties, covering over 40,000 kilometers, interviewing more than 10,000 people, investigating nearly 1,000 leads. The Hengen Group even offered a reward of 1.2 million yuan to capture the murderer. However, despite all efforts, there was no breakthrough. Just as the police were at a standstill, something unexpected happened. The murderer revealed himself. What exactly transpired that year? Let's dive into the story. At 4:40 p.m. on August 9, 1999, the Xinjiang 110 emergency hotline received a report about a murder at the Hengan residential complex, where billionaire Wu Shiji's family resided. The caller was Wu's sister-in-law, Jia Lianying. She stated that around 11 a.m., she had called her sister to invite her family to dinner, but no one answered. She didn't think much of it and planned to call back later. By 4 p.m., still unable to reach anyone, she began to worry. It was understandable if her brother-in-law was too busy to answer, but why was her sister also unreachable? Even the two girls' phones were out of contact. Realizing something was wrong, Xia Lianying rushed to her sister's house. She knocked repeatedly with no response, so she used a spare key to enter. As soon as she stepped inside, a strong smell of gas filled the air. Her first reaction was that the family might have suffered from gas poisoning. She quickly opened the windows and ran into the rooms, only to discover the gruesome sight of her sister's entire family murdered. Panicked, she immediately called the police. Upon investigating the crime scene, the police found all 4 victims tied up, their eyes and mouths sealed with clear adhesive tape. Preliminary forensic analysis revealed that Xia Xiaofan and her 2 daughters had been strangled to death, while Wu Shijie had 3 injuries on his neck and died from hemorrhagic shock. His daughter-in-law, Yang Mianmian, was fortunate to have been out at the time and thus survived. Due to the high-profile nature of the case and Wu Shijie's special status, the Fujian Provincial Public Security Bureau and the Xinjiang City Public Security Bureau swiftly formed a specialized task force, with over 60 officers dedicated to solving the case. However, the police did not expect the investigation to be this difficult. Since the victim's family refused an autopsy, the actual cause of death could not be confirmed immediately. Although multiple fingerprints were found at the scene, China at that time lacked a comprehensive fingerprint database, so investigators could only manually compare and eliminate suspects one by one. The most urgent task was to determine the nature of the case. Was it a crime of personal revenge or a crime of passion? Based on the fact that the murderer brought a knife and adhesive tape and that the crime scene was rummaged through, it seemed like a premeditated robbery. But strangely, although some areas appeared ransacked, nothing significant was stolen, and even tens of thousands of yuan in the bedroom remained untouched. The killer had brutally murdered 4 people, but took only a small amount of valuables. This was highly illogical. Could it be that the murderer staged a robbery to conceal an act of revenge? At this point, forensic experts provided the police with a crucial lead. The autopsy report indicated that Jia Xiaofan and her daughters were killed around 10 a.m. on August 9th, while the last victim, Wu Shiji, was murdered at approximately 12:30 p.m. This meant the killer had remained at the scene for nearly 2 hours. Why did he stay for so long? Another police team started investigating Wu Shiji's social connections. They discovered that although Wu was one of the founders of Hengan Group, he was known as a humble and well-respected businessman with no known enemies. However, the company's director revealed something unusual. Wu had been frequently visiting a hotel to meet someone. Following this lead, police went to the Anping Hotel in Quanzhou to verify the identity of this person. They found out that the woman's name was Tang Min, from Jingmen City, Hubei Province. Years ago, she had business dealings with Hengan Group. According to those familiar with the situation, Tang Min had been living in Guangdong for the past few years, but had suddenly appeared in Xinjiang. She had stayed at the Anping Hotel for several days and notably left the hotel on the afternoon of the murders. Her current whereabouts were unknown. As a result, Xinjiang police immediately requested assistance from the Hubei police. However, something unexpected happened. That same morning, another director from Hengan Group received a phone call from an unknown woman who kept asking about Wu Shiji's whereabouts. When he inquired about her identity, she abruptly hung up. Later, police traced the call to the reception desk of the Nanhu Hotel in Fuzhou. Realizing the urgency, Xinjiang police promptly requested support from Fuzhou police. Unfortunately, by the time they arrived at the hotel, the woman had already left. After further investigation, police confirmed that the caller was indeed Tang Min. Why was she so desperate to contact Wu Shijie? Could she be linked to the case? While the police were still deliberating, they received another call from Anping Hotel, reporting that Tang Min had returned and was once again inquiring about Wu Shiji's whereabouts. Upon receiving this information, police rushed to the hotel and brought Tang Min in for questioning. She claimed she had arranged to meet Wu Shiji in Fuzhou, but upon arrival she couldn't contact him, so she started asking around. After a thorough investigation, police concluded that she had no involvement in the case, and once again the investigation reached a dead end. To gather more leads, the police not only posted notices requesting public assistance, but also increased the reward to 200,000 yuan for any valuable information. During the following investigations, the task force received thousands of anonymous tips. While hundreds of related cases were solved, none provided any clues regarding this high-profile murder case. Investigators were growing increasingly anxious. Just then, a man walked into the police station, claiming he might know something about the killer. According to this man, the previous night, while eating at a roadside stall, he was robbed by 3 fellow townsmen. They stole the mere 20 yuan he had. However, the next day, he saw the same men suddenly flashing a large stack of cash. Even the stall owner found it suspicious and asked them where they had gotten so much money. One of them casually boasted that they had just pulled off something big in Anhai. As he was about to reveal more, another accomplice nudged him, silencing him immediately. With this new lead, police rushed to the food stall to inquire about the 3 men. They discovered that one of them was named Huang Yuxuan, who lived nearby. However, when the police arrived at his home, he had already fled. Nevertheless, in his room, they found evidence that closely matched the crime scene. This further solidified suspicions against Huang Yuxuan. After days of tracking, on August 17, 1999, 9 days after the murder, Huang Yuxuan was arrested. Initially, police believed they had made a major breakthrough, but surprisingly, Huang and his accomplices were not the true perpetrators of the Wu Shiji family murder. It turned out that the money they had was from blackmailing an elderly man. Once again, the case hit a dead end. 1 month had passed, and the case not only caused a stir in the country, but also affected the stock market of Heng An Group in Hong Kong. For this reason, Heng An Group increased the reward by another 1 million yuan, raising the total bounty to 2 million yuan, an enormous amount of money. Many people, tempted by the reward, began to come forward. Among them, a tip-off from a man named Xu Lusi in Guangdong caught the attention of the investigation team. He reported that 2 men, one named Chen Xiaogang and another called Tom Hua, Z had traveled to Anhai, Xinjiang in August that year and were involved in a major crime. Xu Lusi stated that Chen Xiaogang had sold 3 mobile phones, coincidentally matching the 3 phones missing from Wu Shiji's house after the EI murder. Moreover, Chen Xiaogang had a history of robbery. Given the case's severity and the importance of this lead, the director of Heng An decided to personally travel to Guangdong to meet the informant. On September 25, 1999, based on the information provided by Xu Lusi, the police ambushed a barbershop frequented by Chen Xiaogang and successfully arrested him. However, Chen Xiaogang refused to confess to any crime. Eventually, under police persuasion, Chen Xiaogang admitted to committing some robberies but denied involvement in Wu Shijai's case. After comparing fingerprints, the police eliminated him as a suspect, and once again, the case hit a dead. And while the police were at an impasse, the victim's daughter-in-law, Yang Mian, provided a crucial clue. She reported receiving a phone call from an unknown man who claimed to be the murderer of Wu Shijai's entire family. The caller demanded 1 million yuan in exchange for revealing the identity of the person who hired him. This unexpected call reignited the investigation. Since only someone familiar with Wu Shijai's family would know their phone number, the police believed the caller must have had a close connection to them. Through investigation, the police traced the call to Xiamen. Officers from Xinjiang immediately traveled to Xiamen and waited near the public phone booth where the call was made. Meanwhile, another team tapped the phone line at Wu Shiji's residence. The following day, the phone rang again. But this time, the suspect had changed locations. Phone records showed that the caller had also contacted a man named Chen Dingbang. Based on this lead, investigators quickly located Chen Dingbang. According to him, the man who called him was named Yu Hongkai. The police immediately launched an investigation and discovered that Yu Hongkai and Wu Shujai were from the same village, Ling Shui Village, and High Town. Furthermore, Yu Hongkai was a childhood friend of Wu Shiji's son, and their homes were less than 100 meters apart. The police went to Ling Shui Village and successfully collected Yu Hongkai's fingerprints. Oh wait. Comparison confirmed that his fingerprints matched those found at the crime scene. The mastermind behind the case had finally been revealed. Investigating Yu Hongkai's social connections, the police discovered he had been in frequent contact with a security guard named Chen Yongkan at a factory in Shenzhen. The police headed to Shenzhen and interrogated Chen Yongkan. Initially, he refused to provide any information about Yu Hongkai, but under police pressure, he eventually admitted to forging documents for him. Currently, Yu Hongkai was using the alias Lin Xiaodong and was hiding in Shijiazhuang, Hebei Province. On January 17, 2000, Xinjiang police once again traveled to Shijiazhuang. With the cooperation of local authorities, they quickly located Yu Hongkai's hiding place. On the morning of January 18th, the police arrested Yu Hongkai, the suspect in the brutal murder case. After 126 days of investigation, spanning 16 provinces and 86 counties, the Special Task Force finally apprehended the killer. Upon hearing the news, Yang Mian was in shock. Yu Hongkai had been her husband's childhood friend, and their families had been very close. Why would he murder her entire family? Yu Hongkai was born in 1971. Due to his family's poverty, he dropped out of school at 15 and began working at a private auto repair shop. He worked diligently, and within a few years, he became one of the top technicians in the workshop. By then, he was earning over 2,000 yuan per month, a substantial salary at the time. Yu Hongkai's biggest dream was to establish a publicly listed company like Wu Shujai. To achieve this, by the age of 22, he had opened his own auto repair shop. Initially, he ran everything himself, maintaining strict organization, and within a few years he was earning several 100,000 yuan annually. But his success was short-lived. As Yu Hongkai accumulated wealth, he grew arrogant and delegated all his responsibilities to his employees while indulging in a lavish lifestyle. Unbeknownst to him, while his workers were skilled, they lacked managerial expertise. As expected, the business deteriorated, and eventually, his shop was forced to close. The closure of his business was a severe blow to Yu Hongkai. He believed that his company's failure was due to an unjust fate, while Wu Shiji continued to prosper. Convinced that fate had been unfair to him, Yu Hongkai developed a sense of resentment and the intention to rob and kill. On the morning of August 9, 1999, Yu Hongkai arrived at Wu Shiji's house carrying a fruit knife and a roll of transparent tape. Wu Shijai's wife, Ta Xiaofan, opened the door. Since Yu Hongkai was a frequent visitor, she suspected nothing and let him in. The moment he stepped inside, he revealed his true colors. Brandishing the knife, he threatened Ta Xiaofan, demanding all her valuables, then strangled her to death. He stole over 6,000 yuan and 2 gold items. As he was about to leave, Wu Shijai's 2 daughters unexpectedly returned home. Yu Hongkai hid behind the door, waiting for them to enter before forcing them to tie themselves up at knife point. Then he mercilessly killed them. Just as he finished, Wu Shiji returned. Yu Hongkai repeated his tactic, holding the knife to his throat. Seeing his son's childhood friend threatening him, Wu Shijai pleaded, "If you need money, I can give it to you." But by then, Yu Hongkai had lost all rationality. He believed that whether he killed 1 person or 10, the punishment would be the same. Initially, he attempted to strangle Wu Shijai, but the victim struggled too much, forcing Yu Hongkai to stab him 3 times. Before leaving, he deliberately cut the gas line in the house. Given his close ties to the Wu family and the brutal nature of the crime, the police never suspected him. However, greed was his downfall. When he learned about Heng'an Group's 1.2 million yuan reward for information, Yu Hongkai contacted Yang Mian, intending to extort a large sum from her. In the end, his own greed led to his arrest. Thus, the shocking Xinjiang case, which had made headlines both domestically and internationally, was finally solved. Yu Hongkai was sentenced to death, bringing his life of crime to an end. This case demonstrates just how terrifying human jealousy can be. It can drive someone without any personal vendetta to commit murder, even to the extent of taking an entire family's lives, all for one reason: envy. People often say, "You can't judge a book by its cover," and that statement couldn't be more true. Some people may appear rough on the outside but have hearts full of kindness. Some seem cold and distant, but secretly show warmth to the world around them. And then, there are those who wear a flawless exterior while harboring a heart full of darkness and evil. Today, we will talk about the murderer, Wade Wilson. Strangely, when he was arrested and put on trial, not only did some women refrain from condemning him, but they even praised his good looks, calling him charming, and became his obsessed fans. Thousands of letters, accompanied by provocative photos, were sent to express admiration and plead for a reduced sentence. What exactly happened that year? This was a case that shook the entire United States. On October 7, 2019, the Coral Cape Police Department received an emergency call. The caller, a man in a state of panic, reported that a lunatic had barged into his print shop, screaming that he had just killed someone and needed to buy a train ticket to escape. At first, the shop owner thought it was a joke, but when he saw the man's clothes soaked in blood, he realized it was terrifyingly real. By the time the police arrived, the suspect had already fled, leaving behind a black car. The front of the vehicle had visible dents and scratches. When officers opened the door to inspect, they were shocked to find the passenger seat covered in blood. Preliminary investigations revealed that the vehicle was registered to Kristen Melton. While one team attempted to contact the car's owner, another rushed to Melton's apartment for a welfare check. Upon entering the home, officers were horrified by the gruesome scene before them. Right outside the bedroom lay the body of a woman, her face disfigured, a large bruise on her neck, and broken fingernails all soaked in a pool of blood. The corpse was tightly wrapped in clothes and bed sheets. After forensic examination, authorities confirmed the victim was Kristen Melton, born in 1984. She lived a happy single life with her family in Illinois before moving to Coral Cape a few years ago. There, she worked as a waitress at a local restaurant. Outside of work, she helped her cousin care for their child and looked after her mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's. Melton's brother described her as the backbone of the family, always strong and never complaining despite life's hardships. Moreover, she had a good relationship with everyone and never had conflicts with anyone. However, the wounds on her body indicated that despite her efforts to fight back, she had been brutally assaulted before her death. What exactly happened to Melton? The first clue about the suspect. As confusion loomed, Melton's best friend, Cyrus, recounted that on the night before the murder, around 10 p.m., she and Melton went to a bar in Milesburg to unwind after work. There, they met a tall, handsome man who approached them and introduced himself as JR, a 25-year-old. He stood out not only with his short hair, fair skin, large eyes, thick eyebrows, and charming dimples, but also with tattoos on his neck and arms. Standing over 6'3", with a muscular build, JR seemed like the ideal boyfriend, good-looking, humorous, and charismatic. Both women were excited to meet such an intriguing man, and Melton, in particular, felt as if she had met the man of her dreams. Accompanying JR was a man named Jason, who was equally humorous. When the bar closed at 2 a.m., the group wasn't ready to part ways, so they decided to continue their night at Jason's house. As soon as they entered the bedroom, Melton and JR immediately got intimate, while Jason and Cyrus stepped outside to chat, not wanting to intrude. Time flew by, and about an hour later, Jason's family, unable to tolerate the noise, angrily came out and scolded them. JR then drove the two women to Melton's apartment in Coral Cape. At 6 a.m., Cyrus had to leave early to take her child to school. Before leaving, she and Melton made plans to have dinner together later that day. No one could have predicted that would be the last time they ever saw each other. Based on Cyrus's description, police quickly identified the man who stormed into the print shop as JR. They suspected he was likely Melton's killer. However, at 8:50 a.m. on October 7th, another emergency call came in. At a central parking lot in Milesburg, a couple was engaged in a violent altercation. The man was not only beating the woman, but also attempting to drag her into a car. By the time police arrived, he had already fled. The assaulted woman, Melissa, told officers that the night before, she and her boyfriend had gone drinking at a bar. He had brought along a friend and tried persuading her to sleep over at that friend's house, but she refused. Enraged, he abandoned her at the bar and drove her car elsewhere. The next morning, he showed up at her workplace, assaulted her, and even tried strangling her. After struggling for a while, she managed to escape. At 3 p.m., police discovered Melissa's boyfriend, shirtless, lounging inside her car. When asked to surrender the keys and step out, he suddenly sped away. The man had fair skin, large eyes, a muscular build, and tattoos, matching JR's description perfectly. More importantly, he had previously brought friends to the same bar, where Melton met JR and was known for his violent, aggressive nature. After further investigation, police identified him as Wade Wilson, a 25-year-old man. Wade was born on May 20th, 1994, in Milesburg, Florida, under unusual circumstances. His parents were both teenagers, unable to raise him properly. His mother suffered from mental illness and substance abuse, forcing his father to send him to a wealthier foster family. However, unlike tragic stories of mistreated foster children, Wade grew up in the loving care of the Wilsons, who treated him like their own son and regularly participated in church activities. During childhood, Wade was described as cheerful, energetic, athletic, and academically excellent. But upon entering high school, he changed drastically, becoming withdrawn, antisocial, and prone to fighting. Worse, he spiraled into drug addiction. His classmates whispered behind his back, calling him a psycho who fought anyone he encountered. The Wilsons, worried about his lack of control, sent him to rehab centers and psychiatric hospitals, but nothing worked. At 18, Wade began reconnecting with his biological parents, frequently asking them for money. His father, burdened with guilt for abandoning him, gave him large sums of cash each time, only enabling his reckless behavior further. He accumulated an extensive criminal record, frequently getting into trouble with the law. In November 2013, he was arrested for theft and served time until September 2014. In 2015, he was arrested again on charges of kidnapping and sexual assault. Though he pleaded not guilty, the lack of evidence led to his acquittal. 3 years later, Wade was implicated in the murder case of Dennis, where Dennis was accused of conspiring to kill her husband, while Wade was charged with fabricating evidence. On February 19, 2019, Wade's ex-girlfriend accused him of stealing her laptop and phone, kidnapping her, and sexually assaulting her. The court issued a restraining order against him. However, on July 1, 2019, he was arrested again for assault and multiple other charges, including drug trafficking and human trafficking. With such an extensive criminal record, Wade quickly became the prime suspect in Melton's case. What was even more remarkable was that Wade was still on probation at the time of Melton's murder. When the police arrived to interrogate him, they discovered he had fled. As law enforcement scoured the city for him, at 10:30 p.m. that same day, Wade's biological father, Stephen, called the police. He revealed that Wade had confessed to murder over the phone. At first, Stephen did not believe his son's words, but after hearing him describe the details of the crime, he had no choice but to accept the truth. To prevent Wade from descending further into a life of crime, Stephen decided to report him. When Wade called again, Stephen put the phone on speaker so that the police could listen. In the conversation, Wade proudly recounted the 2 murders he had committed in a single day. On the morning of October 7, 2019, while Melton was still asleep, Wade strangled her to death. After killing her, he intended to dispose of her body, but because rigor mortis had already set in and her body wouldn't fit into the trunk of the car, he abandoned it and drove the victim's car to find Melissa to exact revenge for their argument the day before. After assaulting Melissa, his bloodlust still wasn't satisfied, so he continued driving around. At that moment, he spotted a middle-aged woman walking alone. Seeing that she was by herself, Wade hatched an evil plan. He pretended to ask for directions to lure her into his car. As soon as she sat down, Wade immediately strangled and brutally beat her. After some time, the woman passed out from the pain. Wade initially thought she was dead and planned to dump her body, but upon checking, he realized she was still alive. He continued torturing her for a while before running her over with his car more than 10 times. As he recounted these horrific acts, Wade shocked everyone with his complete lack of remorse. He was not only indifferent but even proud of his crimes. He then demanded that his father call a car to help him escape. Although Stephen initially hesitated, he ultimately decided to cooperate with the police. He pretended to agree, tricking Wade into revealing his location, and immediately provided the information to law enforcement. Wade was hiding in an abandoned house. When the police raided the location, they found him leisurely sitting in the living room, eating chicken feet and drinking alcohol, showing no fear or regret despite having taken 2 lives. After Wade was arrested, the police brought Melton's best friend Cyrus to identify him. She confirmed that Wade was the man who had appeared at the bar under the alias JR the night before. According to Wade's phone confession, he had killed 2 women in a single day. Besides Melton, the other victim was identified as Diana, a 43-year-old bartender. On the afternoon of October 7th, Diana's family reported her missing. Investigators found that she was a recently engaged single mother with 2 sons, aged 19 and 29. For 5 years, Diana had worked diligently at a local bar, was well-liked, and had never had any known conflicts with anyone. Around 10 a.m. on October 7, Diana was reported missing while on her way to Sam's pub. The time and location aligned with what Wade had described in his phone call to Stephen. After 3 days of searching, the police finally had a breakthrough. A vulture was seen circling over a field near Sam's store, raising suspicions. When authorities arrived, they were horrified to find a heavily decomposed body, unrecognizable. Through DNA testing and the identification of faded tattoos on the victim's back, police confirmed the body belonged to Diana. Surveillance footage from around the crime scene also showed Melton's car present during the crime. Further investigation revealed Diana's phone inside Melton's car, along with bloodstains on the car door. DNA tests later confirmed the blood belonged to Diana. On October 19, 2019, Wade was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, violent assault, and theft. Despite being convicted and awaiting execution in prison, the story did not end there. While awaiting trial, Wade continued to cause trouble. In October 2020, Wade and a 34-year-old inmate named Joseph plotted an escape. He damaged a prison window and attempted to steal a car to flee, but the plan was foiled in time. By 2023, police found a gray bag near the prison containing 2 sealed packs of liquid tobacco, drugs, a lighter, and other illegal substances. A fellow inmate revealed that Bobby, 36, had smuggled these items into the prison and that Wade was the main distributor among other inmates. As a result of this crime, Wade's sentence was extended by an additional 12 years, and he was fined $50,000. However, these incidents were not the most controversial part of the case. After videos of Wade's trial were made public, many people were drawn to his appearance. His photos and short videos quickly went viral, garnering millions of views and attracting tens of thousands of followers. Some even nicknamed him the Deadpool Killer due to his name matching that of the famous Deadpool character. Shockingly, some netizens argued that the death penalty was unfair and that Wade did not deserve such a harsh sentence. Even more astonishing, Wade's fans organized a fundraising campaign to help Wade build a team of reputable, professional, and capable lawyers. Those who donated between $1 and $50 could enter a lottery for a chance to speak with Wade, while those who contributed over $1,000 would receive a shirt he had worn. Within just a few days, the campaign had attracted hundreds of participants, with some individuals willing to donate up to $24,000. The total amount raised after the campaign reached $72,358. Over 5 years of awaiting trial, Wade received nearly 4,000 letters from fans, including numerous provocative photos. Among them, 163 images were deemed too explicit and were rejected by prison authorities. His fans even wrote letters to the judge, pleading for his death sentence to be reduced. The number of petitions with similar content exceeded 26,000. Although Wade became a social media sensation, a criminal is still a criminal. The deaths of Melton and Diana should not serve as a backdrop for Wade's infamy. Even Wade's biological father, Stephen, admitted that while he had considered helping son escape, he ultimately realized that if the victims had been his mother, daughter, sister, or wife, he would never want anyone to do that for their murderer. Moreover, both victims were undoubtedly beloved individuals in someone's life. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Wade remained indifferent and cold, as if none of it concerned him. During his trial, he appeared in a neatly tailored suit with well-groomed hair, sitting arrogantly in his seat without the slightest sign of remorse. He even made a calm statement. "I'm not a monster nor a saint. Of course, I've made bad decisions, but who hasn't?" By June 2024, after nearly 5 years of proceedings, the case finally went to trial. In court, the judge summoned witnesses and presented crucial evidence, including recorded phone calls, DNA test reports, and surveillance footage. After hours of deliberation, the jury voted to sentence Wade to death for the 2 murders. His other charges, including theft and violent assault, were also tried and sentenced accordingly. At 4:30 p.m. on August 27, 2024, the judge officially sentenced Wade Wilson to death for the murders of Christine Melton and Diana. The final ruling was as follows: 2 death sentences for the murders of Christine Melton and Diana, 5 years in prison for car theft, days for the assault on Melissa, years for burglary, days for petty theft. All sentences would be served concurrently, with credit given for time already served. When the final verdict was announced, the victims' families could no longer hold back their emotions. Some broke down in tears upon hearing the ruling. They had waited far too long to witness justice. Though the murderer had been punished, the wounds in their hearts would never fully heal. We are going to delve into the story of a notorious crime boss in Dali City, Yunnan Province, China. Deng Liang's gang was one of the rare large-scale criminal organizations in Dali City. With more than 70 members, they used violent methods, threats, and extortion to control over half of the city's entertainment venues. In fact, it could be said that they had nearly monopolized the entire entertainment industry in Dali. What was even more chilling was that among the entertainment establishments controlled by Deng Liang's gang, there were over 200 women forced into prostitution. Even more horrifying was the fact that many of them were minors. Beyond that, this crime lord also operated more than 10 gambling dens spread across Dali City. Deng Liang was known for his extreme ruthlessness. In broad daylight, he would openly beat and insult his subordinates and even random passersby, and no one dared to intervene. Whenever he went out, he drove a luxury car, accompanied by numerous bodyguards. Every time he stepped out of the vehicle, his bodyguards would form a protective line around him, making him appear just like the crime bosses in movies. In less than 8 years, Deng Liang's gang was responsible for 134 serious criminal cases, including public disturbances, intentional injury, extortion, and gang fights. Because of this, he was widely regarded as the #1 crime boss in Dali, according to local accounts in Yunnan Province. What shocked people even more was that behind Deng Liang was a massive protection network consisting of over 130 people. His case became one of the most significant examples since China launched its Crackdown on Organized Crime campaign in 2018. So, who exactly was this crime boss? How did he embark on a life of crime? And how did the police finally bring him down? Deng Liang was born in October 1976 in Mi Mountain, Sichuan. As a child, he showed no particularly bad behavior and had a childhood no different from other ordinary kids. He even had a scholarly appearance, looking somewhat intellectual. Because of this, he consistently ranked among the top students in school. In the early 1990s, after graduating from middle school, Deng Liang was accepted into Chengdu Water Conservancy and Hydropower Secondary School with excellent scores. Some may think that attending a secondary school was insignificant, but at that time, secondary schools were a symbol of academic excellence. They were the top choice for outstanding students after middle school. After graduating, students would then consider pursuing high school and later university. Moreover, during that time, secondary school graduates were guaranteed stable employment, ensuring their future security. As a result, after graduation, Deng Liang successfully joined the Numbers and Hydropower Bureau. Later, when the construction of the Manwan hydropower plant began, he was transferred to the construction site in Dali City, Yunnan Province. It was here that he met his first wife, a woman who sold clothes, and later married her. After the wedding, Deng Liang moved to his wife's hometown in Xiangyun County, settling there as a son-in-law. Deng Liang was quick-witted, especially when it came to business. Not long after getting married, he discovered a lucrative business opportunity and decided to open an eco-tourism restaurant in the area. Within a short period, his restaurant flourished, attracting a constant stream of customers and earning him his first substantial fortune. At that time, his life was prosperous. However, despite his financial success, as an outsider who had married into his wife's family, he could not escape the discrimination of the villagers. Especially as his business thrived, his neighbors grew, increasingly envious and displeased. Because of this, whenever he needed to handle certain matters or even just secure parking spaces for customers, he constantly faced obstruction and hostility from the locals. Each time, his mother-in-law had to step in to mediate. Over time, prolonged mistreatment took a toll on Deng Liang's mindset. He gradually realized that if he continued to be submissive and tolerant, he would always be looked down upon and oppressed. If he wanted to change his fate, he needed to become stronger, even ruthless, to gain respect. Eventually, a particular incident caused him to snap completely. He got into a fierce altercation with several villagers. After this event, Deng Liang decided to close his restaurant, take his wife, leave her hometown, and move to Dali City in search of a new path. At that point, his perspective had completely shifted. He believed that to survive and thrive in Dali, he had to be stronger than before. He needed power and subordinates under his command to ensure that no one would dare challenge him. With this mindset, in 2011, Deng Liang used the money he had earned from his restaurant to open the Night Banquet Entertainment Company in the Golden Harbor district of Dali, officially stepping into the bar, karaoke, and entertainment business. The entertainment industry was inherently complex, full of unexpected conflicts that required someone to take control. To protect his turf and build his own influence, Deng Liang quickly recruited dozens of followers. This marked the official formation of his criminal organization. Once he had his subordinates and power, Deng Liang's ruthless nature fully emerged. He used violence, intimidation, and coercion to seize control of numerous bars, karaoke venues, and entertainment establishments in Dali. According to local accounts, whenever he negotiated business deals, he always brought along more than 10 gang members. They would stand directly behind the negotiating party, using threatening gestures such as patting shoulders, grabbing hands, or even squeezing arms tightly, forcing them to sign contracts on his terms. If anyone dared refuse to cooperate, they would be subjected to harassment through soft violence at best and outright gang attacks at worst. In some cases, the gang would not only disrupt competitors' businesses, but even threaten the lives of their family members. Through such ruthless tactics, Deng Liang gradually took over more than half of Dali's entertainment industry, becoming the true entertainment kingpin of the region. However, his methods of making money did not stop there. Deng Liang also monopolized all parking lots surrounding the entertainment venues he controlled. Customers who parked there had to pay exorbitant fees, sometimes reaching hundreds of yuan per hour. Moreover, these fees were entirely arbitrary, determined solely by his subordinates' whims. If any customer complained or questioned the prices, a group of thugs would immediately appear, issuing threats or even resorting to violence on the spot. In fact, The early hours of July 6, 2014, a car owner got into an argument with a parking lot attendant over an unreasonable parking fee. Within moments, several security guards armed with knives and scissors arrived at the scene. They not only brutally beat the man, but also stabbed him so severely that he was left critically injured. To make matters worse, they brazenly snatched the gold necklace from around his neck. Even after the victim reported the incident to the authorities, his complaint was met with silence. From that day on, no one dared to question the parking fees again. However, this was still not enough to satisfy the insatiable greed of Deng Liang. He expanded his operations by turning entertainment venues into places offering special services. Under his control, more than 200 women were forced into this line of work, including many underage girls. To maximize profits, Deng Liang implemented strict rules to monitor and control those he had coerced. He established a KPI system akin to a performance evaluation, imposing revenue targets and client quotas on each worker. Every individual was assigned a number and was required to memorize a set of harsh regulations, as well as undergo service training. On average, each person had to serve at least 3 clients per day, with some attending to as many as 7 or 8. While working in private rooms, they were expected to fulfill all client demands, from close companionship to other intimate interactions. Additionally, alcohol sales quotas were strictly enforced. Failure to meet these targets resulted in salary deductions at best and severe beatings at worst. Of course, for those who wanted to escape or refuse this work, there was virtually no chance. These women were tightly controlled, deprived of their freedom, and lived in constant fear. Every aspect of their daily lives was closely monitored. Leaving that place was nearly impossible, an endeavor harder than reaching the heavens. Meanwhile, Deng Liang indulged in a life of luxury and excess. Surrounded by loyal subordinates and personal attendants catering to his every need, he enjoyed fine dining and lavish entertainment daily. Whenever he stepped out, he was accompanied by at least 4 bodyguards. Every time he got in or out of a car, his guards would exit first, securing all 4 sides before he arrogantly stepped out, his demeanor rivaling that of a crime boss straight out of a movie. His personality became increasingly violent and ruthless. No matter how big or small the issue, day or night, if something displeased him, he would immediately resort to physical violence. Fear of his brutal reputation silenced any dissent. Victims of his abuse never dared to report him to the police, terrified of retaliation. Beyond these illegal activities, gambling was another major source of income for his gang. Unsurprisingly, Deng Liang fully capitalized on this. He operated as many as 16 underground casinos across Dali, strategically located in bustling areas. Wherever there was economic prosperity, his gambling dens thrived, allowing him to amass unimaginable wealth. Deng Liang knew that to maintain his dominance, he needed strong backing. He actively sought connections with powerful figures, ensuring that for years he remained untouchable in Dali. He operated with impunity, free to do as he pleased. However, unlike many other crime lords, Deng Liang harbored a passion for the arts. In 2015, he invested heavily in the entertainment industry, founding Hengshan Media Company in Dali and pouring millions into film production. He funded 2 online films titled Zombie Groom and New Foolish Commander. Notably, most of the actors in these films were key members of his criminal organization. Despite his investment, both films were catastrophic failures, receiving overwhelmingly negative feedback from the market. Yet, this did not dampen his ambition in the film industry. He once declared his intention to invest tens of millions more to produce theatrical releases, aiming to expand his influence in cinema. However, before his filmmaking dreams could materialize, justice caught up with him. In August 2018, as China launched a nationwide crackdown on organized crime, the Ministry of Public Security designated Deng Liang's case as a priority investigation. After over 400 days of relentless pursuit, law enforcement dismantled his entire criminal empire, arresting 75 gang members. During the operation, authorities confiscated 49 banned weapons, 2 replica firearms, 1 explosive device, and 123 gambling machines. By September 2019, Deng Liang was convicted of 8 crimes, including leading and organizing a criminal syndicate. operating illegal casinos, running prostitution rings, extortion, and inciting gang fights. He was sentenced to 24 years and 6 months in prison, and all his assets were seized. Additionally, over 150 officials and influential figures who had protected him were investigated and punished accordingly. With that, his empire collapsed entirely. Looking back on this case, one can see how Deng Liyong transformed from a man driven by personal resentment into a ruthless tyrant who relied on violence for survival. His downfall was inevitable. It was only a matter of time. In the face of adversity, one must remain calm and carefully consider the road ahead, avoiding rash and extreme actions. As the saying goes, true gold will shine eventually. Had Deng Liyong channeled his intelligence and business acumen into legitimate ventures, he might have found success. But a single misguided decision led him down a path of crime, ultimately sealing his tragic fate. As the old adage goes, a moment of patience can prevent a storm, a step back can reveal a vast sky. In life, one must uphold principles and integrity. No matter how tempting personal desires or difficult circumstances may be, losing one's conscience and engaging in immoral deeds will only lead to downfall. What are your thoughts on this crime lord?
In the heart of Chongqing, behind its peaceful and glamorous facade, silent criminal activities have been taking place, shattering the lives of many. In 2011, a major case was exposed, shocking the entire public. A madam trampled on human rights to fulfill her dream of wealth and luxury. Even long after, the victims of this ruthless woman could never forget the hellish years they endured. She was known as the most powerful and infamous gang leader in Chongqing, China. A depraved youth. Wang Ziki was born into an ordinary family in Chongqing, the third of 5 siblings. Due to the large number of children, her family struggled financially. Normally, children who grow up in poverty would be more understanding and responsible, helping their parents. However, Ziki's eldest brother lacked ambition and spent his days associating with gangsters. Eventually, he got involved in a fatal brawl and was sentenced to death. Influenced by her brother's negative example, Ziki was far from a model student. With her striking appearance, she attracted attention from many young men around her. Thanks to her beauty and outgoing personality, she became the object of admiration among gang members. As a result, Ziki saw her looks as her greatest asset. Later on, she decided to quit school, and in 1990, before even graduating from high school, she and her younger sister, Wang Yuaning, opened a beauty salon on the street. With their striking appearances, the two sisters could have easily been the face of their beauty salon, ensuring a thriving business. However, for some reason, their shop remained desolate from the day it opened. Watching other beauty salons crowded with customers, the sisters couldn't help but wonder why the gap was so significant. Later, Ziki quietly investigated and discovered that these salons were not making money from beauty treatments, but from services. Following the advice of industry insiders, Ziki grasped the key to success. After discussing with her sister, they decided to offer these services at their own salon. She believed that with this secret, their business would prosper. However, what puzzled the sisters was that they not only failed to make money, but also suffered significant losses. After months of struggling, they reluctantly admitted they couldn't continue. However, they were filled with resentment. They had invested both money and effort, yet they earned even less than an ordinary job. Despite their unwillingness to accept defeat, reality forced them to close the salon. They decided to find other work to sustain themselves before searching for a different path to wealth. A turning point in life. Just as they were discussing shutting down their business, a couple appeared. 2 mysterious individuals who would change the fate of the sisters forever, ultimately dragging Wang Ziki into an inescapable abyss. The woman, Zhong Guanyu, known in the underworld as Sister Zhong, had been in the prostitution business for many years. She was an experienced figure, well-versed in every aspect of the trade. The man, Dao Minggu, was nicknamed the socialite, but in reality, he was nothing more than a parasite who lived off women. Ironically, Because he was constantly surrounded by women, he understood their psychology very well, making him highly effective in management. When the couple proposed a partnership with Ziki, she agreed without hesitation. After all, her salon was already failing. At worst, she would still have to shut it down. She figured she might as well take a gamble. And so, the four of them embarked on an illegal money-making venture. What Ziki didn't anticipate was that as soon as the couple got involved, business at her salon suddenly boomed, drawing in an overwhelming number of customers. As a result, Ziki and her sister accumulated their first real earnings in life. After tasting success, the sisters began dreaming bigger. They wanted to expand their operations to make even more money. Tempted by enormous profits, the Wong sisters plunged deeper into the world of crime. By the end of 1998, Ziki had opened a tea house in the suburbs. At that time, tea houses were incredibly popular. Though they officially opened in the afternoon, they remained brightly lit and packed with customers until the early hours of the morning. The waiting line outside stretched to hundreds of people, almost longer than those at specialist doctors' clinics. To keep waiting customers entertained, Ziki innovatively introduced recreational facilities, such as card game rooms and billiards tables on the lower floors. Her tea house quickly became a top entertainment hotspot known to everyone, the Madam of Chongqing. After the success of her tea house, Ziki continued expanding, eventually opening 8 more prostitution venues throughout the city. Having mastered the trade, she grew increasingly ambitious. Ziki understood that in order to run a successful business, she needed a steady customer base. To retain clients, she had to offer them something that kept them interested. In this industry, what customers truly sought was novelty. But how could she provide it? After much deliberation, the Wong sisters came up with a cruel strategy: recruiting workers from job markets. Though they had a plan, execution was difficult, as most job seekers were decent people who would never willingly enter such a trade. Understanding this, the sisters resorted to deception. They lured young, beautiful girls with promises of high salaries and stable jobs. These girls, young and inexperienced, were thrilled to find what seemed like a great opportunity, unaware that they were stepping into a den of wolves. Once inside, leaving was nearly impossible. Ziki would find excuses to confiscate their identification cards and phones, cutting off all communication with the outside world. Stripped of their documents, the girls became powerless, left with no choice but to obey. Some attempted to resist. This was when Dao Minggu's role became crucial. For first-time offenders, he would grant a chance. He locked them in a dark room without food for several days. However, for repeat offenders or those who refused to comply, he showed no mercy. The lightest punishment was a brutal beating. In worse cases, survival was uncertain. One of his most infamous torture methods involved an iron bed that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who heard about it. If a girl refused to engage in prostitution or tried to escape, she would be tied to this bed, subjected to violent beatings, and even sexual assault. Through such brutal means, Ziki maintained total control over the women. As her business expanded, Ziki went on to establish 9 more prostitution venues in Yuzhong District, Chongqing. However, with growing success and wealth, she also attracted envy and resentment. This led her to seek protection for herself. Apart from hiring assassins to eliminate those who disrupted her business, she also maintained close connections with other gang leaders. Knowing that her work could never be made public, she needed protection to continue operating. In addition to offering hefty bribes, Wang Ziki took on the task of supplying beautiful women to serve high-ranking officials in the Chongqing Police Department, including Huang Daicong, Deputy Director of the Criminal Investigation Division, and Chen Dao, Deputy Director of the Public Security Bureau. With this, she easily secured powerful backing. Once she had protection, her tea house business flourished even more. Wang Ziki's success was largely attributed to her team of hostesses. According to unofficial statistics at her various establishments, up to 2,000 women were held captive, and the number of clients they served reached into the millions. These figures were truly shocking. At this point, she had officially become the most powerful female crime boss in Chongqing, and no force dared to challenge her. A nightmare for the women. Beyond the threats of violence, Ziki and her accomplices treated these women with extreme cruelty, enforcing a fascist-like management system. The women were confined in small, cramped rooms with only a few bunk beds, no larger beds or furniture. During peak times, some were even forced to sleep on the floor, barely surviving day to day. They were locked up all day and only released at night to work. Even during their menstrual cycles or after forced abortions, they were not allowed to rest. Their lives were filled with suffering and despair. After each night's work, they were forced to attend evaluation meetings. Every week, a major meeting was held where those who violated rules or received customer complaints were punished on the spot. One girl, Zhou, was beaten and restrained for so long in the tea house that she developed a psychological disorder. She could only fall asleep if she tied herself up. Under prolonged, inhumane torture, her mental state deteriorated. She even began undressing involuntarily whenever she saw a man, demonstrating the horrors these women endured under Ziki's control. Another girl, Jun, realized she had been deceived and begged to leave. However, this infuriated Ziki, who then forced Jun to comply, just like all the others. But deep down, Jun never gave up on escaping. Finally, after 6 months, she saw an opportunity. One night, she was locked alone in a residential building. Overjoyed, she waited for the guard to leave and immediately attempted to escape using a rope she had secretly prepared. Tragically, the rope was too short, leaving her dangling mid-air from the 8th floor. In a desperate act of survival, she let go and fell. When she regained consciousness, she was told that she had suffered permanent paralysis. However, before she could even process the loss of her legs, Dao Minggu, one of Ziki's top enforcers, arrived to threaten her. He forced her to claim that she had simply fallen while cleaning a window, warning that if she refused, he would kill her and her family. Terrified, Jun complied, becoming a puppet, saying exactly what they wanted. She thought that by obeying, they might let her go. But even after becoming paralyzed, she was still not free. To cover up their crimes, Ziki's gang continued to detain her illegally for 6 years. It was only when the police finally rescued her that she was freed from the darkness. During those 6 years, she lived in a pitch-black room, only able to move around by pulling on a rope. The women not only endured harsh living conditions, but were also fed moldy or expired food. Moreover, they were forced to undergo training sessions and escape drills. Ziki demanded that they be fully dressed within 25 seconds after hearing an alarm and follow a predetermined escape route. One might wonder, if Ziki believed she was untouchable, why bother with escape drills? In reality, this was one of her most cunning psychological manipulations. These drills were nothing but brainwashing exercises. During some sessions, Ziki would arrange for her men to dress as police officers, pretending to arrest and interrogate the women. If any girl dared to confess the crimes they suffered or pleaded for real police help, she was severely punished, thrown into a dark cell without food or water for days, or brutally beaten. Because of these drills, the women became convinced that Ziki controlled the police, leaving them completely hopeless. None of them realized it was all an elaborate deception to ensure total obedience. With these cruel strategies, Ziki kept thousands of women under her iron grip for 15 years, amassing hundreds of millions of yuan, while countless women were harmed or went missing. Retribution for evil. However, as the saying goes, those who commit evil will pay the price. After 15 years of unchecked rule, the Chinese government's intensified crackdown on organized crime and the fall of her protectors finally led to Ziki's exposure. On the night of August 7, 2009, Chongqing police raided Ziki's tea house with over 200 officers, dismantling her criminal empire and arresting 38 individuals, including high-level managers. However, the main culprits, Wang Ziki, Wang Yuaning, and Dao Minggu, escaped capture. The police quickly tracked their movements. Wang Yuaning had fled overseas, while Ziki and Dao Minggu hid in Shenyang after their business was shut down. On September 9, 2009, police arrested Ziki and her accomplices in a shopping mall in Shenyang. By August 2010, the court publicly announced their sentences. Wang Ziki was sentenced to death, and all her personal assets were confiscated. Dao Minggu received the death sentence and was stripped of his political rights for life. Meanwhile, Wang Yuaning fled China and hid in Austria and the Philippines. In response, Chongqing police issued a red notice through Interpol. Eventually, with the assistance of Philippine authorities, Yuaning was captured at a fast food restaurant. On April 1st, she was extradited back to Chongqing for trial. For years, Ziki and Yuaning disregarded the law, brutally enslaving over 2,000 women, murdering countless victims, and eliminating their enemies. Their atrocities were beyond forgiveness. But as the saying goes, the net of heaven is vast, though sparse, none escape. On December 7th, 2011, Wang Ziki and her accomplices were executed. For 15 years, countless young women with dreams were tortured, exploited, and abused. Even today, many survivors struggle to move on, forever haunted by the horrors they endured. Some never regained the strength to rebuild their lives. The crimes committed by Ziki and her gang were beyond redemption. They trampled on human dignity, stripping women of their future and hope. This case has now come to an end. What do you think about the notorious madam and crime boss, Wang Ziki?
There. In this life, there are moments when we are forced to confront despair so profound that it defies description. Everyone has their own answer to the question, what is the most hopeless situation? But for the woman in today's story, the greatest despair was perhaps realizing that all her efforts to cling to life would ultimately be in vain. Death was inevitable, no matter how hard she fought against it. On April 1st, 2012, in the city of Suwon, South Korea, at around 10:30 p.m., 28-year-old Kim was walking home after a long day at work. She was employed at a mobile phone manufacturing company, which was only about a kilometer away from her home. By this time, the buses had stopped running, and taking a taxi would cost her around 2,000 won. In reality, this amount was not particularly high, and her company even provided a transportation allowance of 100,000 won. But Kim didn't want to waste even a single one. Her family was struggling financially. She had to help pay off her father's debts while also taking care of her mother and younger brother, who was still in university. Although her salary was not too low, she lived frugally, saving every possible penny to support her family. For this reason, she chose to walk home rather than spend money on a taxi. However, nearly 5 hours later, Kim had still not arrived home, and her family was unable to reach her. Overcome with worry, they decided to report her missing to the police. But it wasn't until 3 a.m. on April 2nd that the police began their search. Initially, only 2 patrol cars and 5 officers were dispatched to the scene. Kim's older sister also joined the search efforts. But when the police car stopped in front of a convenience store, instead of taking action, the 2 officers inside dozed off, leaving Kim's sister to listen to updates through their radio. Little did they know that just 10 meters away, the monster was still there, and the victim was still alive. At 6 a.m., the number of officers increased to 10. By 6:50 a.m., 35 members of the investigative team officially took over. However, the chief of criminal investigations, who should have been present from the beginning, only arrived at 9 a.m., acting as if this case was of little importance. At 9:30 a.m., the police knocked on the door of a gas station located just 5 meters from the rented home of Oh Wan-chung. The station owner provided a crucial piece of information. The previous night, between 10:30 and 11 p.m., he had been drinking outside when he suddenly heard a woman's desperate scream. Thinking it might be a fight, he got up to check, but all he saw was a dark alley. Then, a loud metallic slam echoed through the night, followed by a woman sobbing and pleading, "I was wrong. Please help me." He hesitated for a few seconds before going back inside, assuming it was just a domestic dispute. Based on this information, the officers approached a rusted metal door tucked between rows of dilapidated houses. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than an abandoned storage unit. They knocked, but there was no response. When they stepped inside, they were met with a scene so horrifying that it would haunt them for the rest of their careers. In the damp, mold-streaked room, a middle-aged man sat casually smoking a cigarette, his eyes fixed on an adult film playing on his screen. In his hand was a blood-stained knife, the crimson still fresh. In front of him, Kim's body had been dismembered and stuffed into at least 14 plastic bags. Some of the bags had even been crammed into the washing machine. The sheer brutality of the crime surpassed anything the police had ever witnessed. Kim's body had been butchered into hundreds of pieces, requiring 14 forensic doctors, far more than the usual 2 or 3 assigned to a homicide case, to piece together her remains. Due to the extreme level of mutilation, it was impossible to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. The man at the crime scene was immediately taken into custody. His name was Oh Chung, a Chinese national born as Wu Xunyuan in 1982 in Inner Mongolia. Soon after, he confessed everything that had transpired the previous night. Around 9 p.m. on April 1, 2012, Oh Chung returned to his rented apartment after work. The remnants of a previous meal, a few pieces of pig's trotters, still sat on the table, enough for dinner. He poured himself a glass of strong liquor, then another, and another. As the alcohol seeped into his system, he silently peeled a tangerine, his gaze fixed on the television screen. After a while, he stood up, intending to step outside for a smoke and to take out the trash. But whether it was the alcohol giving him courage or a sudden burst of impulse, a primal desire overtook him. He decided to hide behind an electrical pole outside his home, waiting for a woman to pass by. 20 minutes later, Kim appeared. At that moment, Oh Chung lunged from behind the pole. Before Kim could react, he grabbed her by the neck, choking her tightly as he dragged her into his apartment. Overwhelmed with terror, Kim froze, her mind gripped by panic. She was too shocked to resist immediately. Oh Chung's apartment was damp, filthy, and reeked of decay. There was hardly any furniture, just a chaotic mess of trash and random objects. Strangely, despite the abundance of sanitary pads scattered across the floor, there was no sign of any female presence. In the corner of the room, an open suitcase revealed his clothing and underwear. Some garments were strewn carelessly across the bed, making the space feel even more suffocating. He turned to Kim and said nonchalantly, "I'll pay you. More than 10 times what I pay for rent." Kim didn't respond. She knew reasoning with this man was pointless. Her only chance was to escape. She scanned the room, searching for a way out. The door was right behind Oh Chung, but he was blocking the exit. She cautiously stepped forward, pretending to move past him in hopes of finding an opportunity to dash outside. But Oh Chung saw through her plan. He grabbed her, threw her to the floor, and dragged her into the bedroom. Pinning her down on the bed, he began tearing at her clothes, but Kim refused to submit. She fought back with all her strength, thrashing wildly and making it impossible for him to carry out his intentions immediately. Then, Oh Chung suddenly felt the urge to urinate. In reality, he always felt this sensation before engaging in any sexual act. So he let go of Kim and stood up, walking toward the bathroom, which was only a few steps from the bedroom. The bathroom was located along the path leading to the front door. If Kim wanted to escape, this was her only chance. However, Oh Chung, while relieving himself, kept his eyes on the bedroom, glancing over periodically to monitor her movements. Afraid that she would be caught again, Kim changed her plan. She sprinted toward the bedroom door and locked it from the inside. Then, she grabbed her phone and dialed 112 to call the police. As soon as the call connected, she repeatedly stated that she was being attacked and tried to describe her location. However, the emergency operator did not immediately alert the police. Instead, they bombarded her with questions, asking if she was certain she was being assaulted, who the attacker was, how he had entered the room, and demanding more precise details before taking action. Outside the room, Oh Chung pounded on the door. Kim, consumed by terror, pleaded for her life, but the door could not protect her for long. He burst in, snatched the phone from her hands, and flung it into a corner. The emergency call only managed to capture the operator's final words. "Hello, please repeat that." After that, the line remained open, but all the police could hear were Kim's desperate screams, interwoven with the sickening sound of fabric being torn apart. Inside the filthy lair of the monster, Kim trembled in fear throughout the night, unable to sleep. Oh Won-chung, frustrated by her fierce resistance, failed to rape her and eventually fell asleep holding her. But as the first light of dawn crept in, the beast awoke, his hunger still unsatisfied. He lunged at her again, but Kim continued to fight back with all her strength. Oh Won-chung's rage boiled over. He had kidnapped this woman, held her captive all night, and yet she still defied him. Overcome with fury, he stormed out of the room, heading straight to the kitchen, where he rummaged under the sink and grabbed a wrench. Without hesitation, he returned to the room, lifted the tool high above his head, and brought it crashing down onto Kim's skull. Blood seeped from the blanket, spreading across the mattress. He wrapped her lifeless body, dragged her into the bathroom, and lit a cigarette, contemplating his next move. But just then, Kim's body began convulsing, trembling violently. Oh Won-chung rushed back into the bedroom, grabbed a scarf, and strangled her until he was certain she was dead. Where were the police during all this time? Hours had passed since the family reported Kim missing, yet the police had only begun a lackluster search. Within a 300-meter radius of the crime scene, there were 137 households. Incredibly, 133 of them later claimed they had no idea the police were even there. This was because the officers only checked houses with lights on, quietly passing by those that were dark, never knocking, never verifying. Even worse, rather than taking decisive action, officers merely pressed their ears against doors to listen for suspicious noises. If they heard nothing, they simply walked away. When questioned later, South Korean police defended their approach, saying that since it was nighttime, they didn't want to disturb the residents. They considered checking every house too troublesome, despite having the legal authority to enter private property if a life was in danger. And so, for the entire 6 hours of Kim's captivity, no one arrived in time to save her. It wasn't until 9:30 a.m. the next day, when police knocked on the door of a gas station near the suspect's home and received a witness statement, that the truth began to unfold. On April 4th, the police held a press conference admitting their failure. Despite deploying 35 officers for an overnight search and arresting the suspect within 13 hours, they had been unable to save Kim. The real issue was that the police had received an emergency call from the victim, a fragile chance that could have changed everything. According to them, the call lasted only 15 seconds and provided no useful information. No description of the suspect, no address, no name, just a weak plea. "I'm being attacked." But if that was the case, why hadn't they released the full sigh? Recording? Public suspicion grew. In response to mounting criticism, South Korean authorities revised their statement on April 5th, revealing that the call had actually lasted 1 minute and 20 seconds. When the recording was finally released, the public was horrified. Even in her desperate situation, Kim had tried to remain calm, repeatedly stating her location clearly. Yet the emergency operator bombarded her with meaningless robotic questions. Questions no one could possibly answer while facing imminent death. Even more disturbingly, this operator had only been on the job for 2 months, with less than 2 weeks of training. As the sound of the door being kicked in echoed through the call, Kim's nightmare truly began. Yet even in that moment of terror, she cleverly pretended to disconnect and threw the phone aside, hoping the police would trace her location through the signal. In reality, the call had lasted not 1 minute and 20 seconds, but 7 minutes and 36 seconds, 5 times longer than the police initially claimed. Instead of acknowledging their failure, the authorities defended their actions, claiming that the last 6 minutes of the call contained nothing but screams and pleas for mercy, which held little investigative value. They insisted they withheld the full recording to protect the victim's family. But Kim's family did not believe this excuse. They demanded to hear the entire recording, and what they discovered was not just heartbreaking, it was infuriating. Those who listened to all 7 minutes and 36 seconds of the call were not just devastated, but outraged. South Korea's 112 emergency System classified calls on a scale from 0 to 4 before forwarding them to the nearest police station. The station that received Kim's call was only a 7-minute drive from the scene. But instead of acting swiftly, the emergency operator hesitated, unsure how to handle the situation. As a result, the call was passed around between 20 officers, leading to a ridiculous discussion while the victim suffered. The last 6 minutes of the call were not just filled with Kim's cries for help, they also captured the officers' casual conversation. They spoke carelessly, lazily, and even failed to mute their own voices. During Kim's most desperate moments, one officer remarked, "I think they know each other. Could this be a domestic dispute?" Another officer lazily replied, "No one's answering, just hang up." And just like that, Kim's final plea for help, her only chance at survival, was cruelly cut off by the very people sworn to protect her. Beyond the lies about the emergency call, on April 2nd, during their search, police had already confirmed that a security camera at the back entrance of an elementary school had captured footage of Oh Wan-chung dragging his victim. The 13-second clip was undeniable evidence. Yet until April 9th, more than a week later, the police continued to deny the existence of this footage. When confronted, officers explained that since the suspect had already been arrested early on, they had not prioritized reviewing the video. Kim's case was a glaring testament to the catastrophic failure of South Korea's emergency response system. From the emergency dispatcher to the police officers, every link in the rescue chain failed, robbing her of multiple chances to survive. First, the incompetence of the 112 operator significantly delayed response time. If the dispatcher had been better trained, they could have guided Kim to provide more useful details, such as the floor number of the building, the suspect's appearance, or whether he had facial hair. Detailed information like this would have helped pinpoint her location and apprehend the criminal. Moreover, in emergency situations, police generally advise victims to keep their phone lines open until officers arrive. Kim, despite not being instructed to do so, had the intelligence to leave the call connected. This could have provided crucial background noise for investigators to analyze. However, in this case, the police recklessly cut off the call. An irresponsible operator, inexperienced witnesses, and passive search efforts all worked together to push Kim further and further toward an irreversible fate. Furthermore, law enforcement made baffling decisions that unnecessarily expanded the search area. Upon reviewing the case, experts pointed out that if the police had initially focused on the 65 households Kim had described, a small search team could have quickly located the suspect. However, this report was disregarded by a newly appointed BD police chief. Instead, he maintained vague orders, causing the investigation area to expand to a staggering 3,000 households. Following the case, the killer's motives became a topic of heated debate. When Oh Wan-chung arrived in South Korea in 2007, he worked as a farmer and took on various temporary jobs. He had traveled to South Korea for work 3 times and had a wife and children back in China. In May 2010, he began working in the Suwon-Seodong area. The room he rented was 19.8 square meters with a monthly rent of 150,000 Korean won. He drank alcohol daily and hired special services every month. After borrowing from high-interest lenders, he found himself unable to repay his debts and was frequently beaten, which fueled his obsession with money. Oh Wan-chung killed Kim because he was enraged by her resistance during his attempted assault. He also feared losing the 7 million won he had earned from his work in South Korea. At that moment, the monster recalled scenes from American mafia films, and to avoid being caught by the police, he sought to destroy the victim's body as thoroughly as possible. However, Kim's family and the public raised doubts about this reasoning. According to Oh Wan-chung, his primary goal was to dispose of the body and flee as quickly as possible. Yet his execution of the crime appeared disturbingly methodical and cold-blooded. He spent 6 hours meticulously dismembering the victim into over 200 pieces, yet he left her internal organs intact. This detail led the court to consider an alternative motive, potentially related to organ trafficking. However, during the appeal trial, the Suwon court dismissed this theory, concluding that Oh had simply acted with extreme brutality in a state of desperation. His bank account showed no suspicious transactions, and the victim's remains had been placed only in plastic bags. Ultimately, Oh-Won Chung was spared the death penalty from the initial ruling and instead sentenced to life in prison. Additionally, he was ordered to wear an electronic monitoring device for 30 years and have his personal information publicly disclosed for 10 years. Nevertheless, critics argued that sparing Oh-Won Chung, a man who attempted to assault a woman and then dismembered her, was unjust. In a post-case interview, the head of Suwon's criminal investigation team stated that finding the victim within 13 hours was remarkably fast and that even if they had located her sooner, she might have already been dead. This cold and detached remark further infuriated the South Korean public. As a result, the officer was suspended from duty for 3 months. Under immense public pressure, the National Police Commissioner also submitted his resignation. In life, no one can predict the unexpected. Hardships can strike suddenly, taking away the peace we once knew. But it is in these moments that a person's true strength is revealed. The story of Barbara Maybe Abel is a testament to the extraordinary power of family love. Barbara and Beverly were twin sisters, identical like 2 drops of water. But from a young age, Beverly faced severe health issues due to cerebral palsy. Throughout her life, Barbara affectionately called her sister Bevy. Their bond was so strong that a single glance was enough to understand each other's thoughts. Since childhood, Barbara devoted herself to ensuring Bevy had a full and happy life. After their father passed away, she took care of their mother and managed the household. In April 1968, after bringing her newborn son Dale home from the hospital and finalizing her divorce, Barbara decided to raise him at her mother's house, a decision she never regretted. Their family lived happily together, but in May 1974, tragedy struck when their mother passed away. Barbara and Beverly grieved deeply, but they tried to keep the house filled with warmth and laughter. On the morning of Thursday, November 14, 1974, their day began like any other. Barbara prepared for work, Dale got ready for school, and Beverly enjoyed her breakfast. After dropping Dale off, Barbara drove to the radio station where she worked as an editor. Near midday, she called home multiple times, but Beverly didn't answer, an unusual occurrence since Bevy always picked up. At first, Barbara brushed it off and continued her work. After finishing her shift, Barbara drove home with her son. As soon as she stepped inside, she called out for Beverly but received no response. She told Dale, "Go find Aunt Bevy while I get you some water." As Dale ran around the house searching for his aunt, Barbara went to the kitchen. Suddenly, an eerie chill ran down her spine. Turning instinctively, she was met with a horrifying sight, a man pointing a gun directly at her. At that moment, Dale ran into the kitchen, panicked. "Mom, Aunt Bevy is in her room, but there's a lot of blood." Barbara clutched her son tightly, shielding him from the stranger. The man, armed and dangerous, forced them into the bedroom. Inside, Barbara found Beverly curled up under a blanket, her mouth gagged with a piece of cloth. Rushing to her, Barbara gently removed the gag, hugged her, and kissed her forehead. "We're going to be okay. I promise," she whispered, trying to comfort her sister. But when she pulled the blanket down, horror consumed her. Beverly was unclothed. Overcome with rage, Barbara turned to the man and screamed, "Did you rape her? If you did, I swear I'll kill you." The man smirked and admitted that he had tried but failed. A wave of fear overtook Barbara as she imagined the suffering Beverly had endured. Desperate to protect her family, Barbara composed herself and offered him all the money she had, including her car keys, in exchange for their safety. But the man had another demand. He wanted to take her son. Without hesitation, Barbara volunteered to go in Dale's place. After a tense moment, the man agreed to her proposal. He introduced himself as Paul John Knowles, a fugitive who had escaped prison and vowed never to return. But Barbara, still reeling from what had happened to Beverly, didn't believe a word he said. Her only concern was keeping her son safe. Before leaving, Knowles tied Dale to the bed alongside his aunt. Barbara's heart ached at the thought of leaving her family helpless and bound. but she had no choice. As she was forced out the door, she turned to Dale and said, "Be brave, sweetheart. I will come back." With that, Knowles grabbed the car keys and money, pressed the gun against her back, and led her outside. Inside the vehicle, Barbara's mind raced with worry for her son and sister, unaware that she was now in grave danger herself. Meanwhile, just a few miles from Barbara's home, police discovered an abandoned car belonging to a man named William Bates. He had been carjacked in September, and months later, his body was found in Ohio, strangled to death. Inside the car, investigators found credit cards and insurance papers belonging to Carswell Carr, a man who had been murdered along with his 15-year-old daughter Amanda in Georgia just days before Barbara's abduction. The Carr family's home had been ransacked on November 6, 1974, nearly 500 miles from Barbara's residence. Amanda had been strangled, while her father was stabbed approximately 35 times. Inside the stolen vehicle, investigators also discovered a will signed by a man named Paul John Knowles. What they didn't realize was that Knowles was a serial killer, roaming the country and leaving bodies in his wake. In just 5 months, over 30 people had been murdered, possibly even more. Police warned that anyone could be a target: men, women, children. If he wanted to kill, nothing would stop him. As law enforcement scrambled to catch him, they had no idea that Paul John Knowles was already on the road with his next victim. Back in the car with Barbara, the radio suddenly aired a breaking news report about a murder. Instantly agitated, Knowles ordered her to change the station. Before she could question him, he casually admitted, "I killed that person." His confession, spoken as lightly as a passing remark, sent a chill down Barbara's spine. Realizing she needed to distract him, she engaged him in conversation. They talked about the weather, movies, and the greatest songs of the 70s. Then an idea sparked in her mind. She would make him fall for her, soothing his erratic behavior and buying herself time to escape. Turning to him with a soft voice, she asked, "Darling, would you like a cigarette?" Her sudden shift in tone startled him. "Why did you call me darling?" he asked suspiciously. Barbara simply smiled and replied, "Why not? You're not so bad. You even look a little like Robert Redford." Her words took him by surprise, momentarily throwing him off guard. As they continued talking, Knowles opened up about his twisted thoughts. When he learned that Barbara was a radio editor and could write, he confided that he wanted to be famous for killing. Hearing his confession over and over, Barbara felt a deep sense of terror. Every instinct screamed at her to jump out of the car and run, but she knew she had to suppress her fear and remain composed. Back at home, Dale, Barbara's son, had been struggling against his restraints. After 30 agonizing minutes, he finally managed to free himself and untie his aunt. Without hesitation, he ran to the neighbor's house, frantically pounding on the door. His body was covered in blood, his wrists and ankles bruised from the tight ropes. Between sobs, he cried out, "My mom! She's been kidnapped!" When the police arrived, they feared the worst. The details they gathered painted a chilling portrait of Paul John Knowles. He was constantly on the move, using different vehicles, with mismatched license plates, leaving behind credit card receipts and scattered identities. Law enforcement knew enough about him to be terrified that Barbara's chances of survival were slim. Without wasting time, the police immediately set up roadblocks and expanded their search across the region. All eyes were on Barbara's yellow Volkswagen. However, the problem was that Paul John Knowles had already taken Barbara far from the area. After driving nearly 70 miles north along Florida's A1A highway, the two stopped at a motel in Fort Pierce. When the car halted, Barbara pleaded with him to let her go, but he coldly pressed the gun against her back and said, "No, you're coming with me." Fear washed over Barbara, but she knew she had to stay calm to avoid provoking him. They posed as a married couple to rent a room. At the front desk, Knowles placed his hand on Barbara's hip, his gun hidden beneath his shirt. Sensing the receptionist's suspicion, Barbara quickly wrapped her arm around Knowles and pulled him closer. Eventually, they were given the key to room 10. As soon as they entered, Knowles ordered Barbara to undress, but she firmly resisted. His anger erupted, transforming him into a violent and uncontrollable beast. For a moment, Barbara truly believed he would kill her. In desperation, she weakly asked, "What are you doing?" Paul suddenly paused, shook his head, and muttered, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Paul John Knowles was completely unpredictable. One moment he was calm, the next he was a raging monster. Barbara felt utterly powerless, unsure if she would survive the night. He then tore the blanket into strips and tied her wrists and ankles to the bed frame. Terrified, Barbara silently prayed for a miracle. Exhausted both physically and mentally, she eventually drifted into sleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her mother, who appeared tenderly and reassured her, "Everything will be okay." The vision gave her strength. She woke to the sound of a television. Paul sat beside her, eyes fixated on the screen. When she looked up, she saw their faces on the news. The reports of his horrifying crimes made her panic, but she also realized something. The fact that her kidnapping was on television meant her sister and son were safe. That thought brought her a small sense of relief. By November 15th, Barbara had been missing for over 18 hours, yet the police had found no trace of her. A nationwide manhunt for Paul John Knowles was launched, spreading news of a serial killer kidnapping a woman in Florida. As for Barbara and Knowles, when he woke up, he untied her and took her to a small restaurant nearby. Seated at the table, Barbara discreetly scanned the surroundings, hoping to find a chance to escape. However, she quickly noticed Knowles had his gun hidden beneath his coat. She silently prayed that someone had seen her face on the news and would recognize her, but to her dismay, no one did. After breakfast, Knowles drove Barbara back to the motel and again attempted to assault her, but once again he failed. His frustration grew. Barbara was terrified. She felt that as long as she was with him, she could be killed at any moment. She tried to soothe him, and surprisingly, after calming down, Knowles sighed and said, "I wish I had met you before all of this happened." The defining moment. A while later, he tied her back to the bed, saying he needed to step out to make a phone call. As soon as the door shut behind him, Barbara struggled with all her strength to free herself. While trying to escape, she spotted the room key on the bedside table. This meant Paul had locked himself out. He couldn't get back in, unless she opened the door for him. If he called for hotel staff, it would expose him. Paul John Knowles wrestled with the door handle. A mix of excitement and fear surged through Barbara. She remained silent, waiting. The handle rattled continuously, before suddenly going still. A few moments later, she heard Knowles whisper through the door, "When they take you away, don't tell them I hurt you. I love you." Then silence. He was probably planning something insane. Barbara was too afraid to scream for help, fearing he might still be standing outside. At 7:30 a.m. on November 16th, after a long wait, she finally picked up the phone and called the front desk, identifying herself as Barbara Maybe and reporting that she had been kidnapped by a serial killer. Within minutes, police arrived and escorted her out of the room. At the front desk, Barbara received a phone call from her sister, Beverly. They tearfully exchanged words of relief, grateful that both were safe. After hanging up, Barbara sobbed uncontrollably for 15 minutes. Even after reuniting with her family, she remained haunted by the fear that Paul John Knowles was still out there. She was terrified that one day he would return to her home and continue what he had started. The end of a serial killer. Paul's crimes began unraveling on November 16, 1974, when State Trooper Charles Campbell pulled him over for a routine check. Recognizing Barbara's stolen Volkswagen, the officer attempted to arrest him, but Knowles fought back. He managed to snatch the trooper's gun, took him hostage, and forced him into the patrol car before speeding away. Shortly after, he used the police siren to pull over a car driven by James Meyer, a 29-year-old man. He took both Meyer and the officer hostage, forcing them into Meyer's vehicle. Barbara's yellow Volkswagen was left behind, while the police officer and his patrol car vanished. A police abduction had never happened before, and the news spread across the country like wildfire. Eventually, Campbell's patrol car was found, abandoned by the roadside. In Lakeland, Georgia, 80 miles from where the officer was kidnapped, a gas station attendant alerted police after seeing a suspicious scene. A man in civilian clothes and a state trooper sat in the back seat of a car with another man driving. The police immediately began pursuit. They set up a roadblock ahead, forcing Knowles to crash into the barricade. He then abandoned the car and ran into the woods. The chaotic foot chase involved officers, K-9 units, and helicopters. Just when it seemed like they had him cornered, he managed to escape. However, he had been shot in the leg during the chase. Wounded, he was eventually spotted by a hunter who managed to subdue him until authorities arrived and placed him under arrest. Although Paul John Knowles was finally captured, police were horrified to discover that neither of the two hostages were in the crashed car. Knowles refused to reveal their whereabouts. This news was a massive relief for Barbara and her family. But deep down, she knew that the man who had kidnapped and held her captive for over 36 hours had previously escaped from prison. She still did not feel safe. What Barbara truly wanted was for Paul John Knowles to no longer exist. Even after the ordeal, Barbara struggled with painful memories. There were times when she would suddenly break down, screaming and crying uncontrollably. She knew she needed professional help, but more than anything, she longed to share her emotions with someone who would understand. A year before the incident, Barbara had met Jim. However, due to his work requiring him to travel abroad, they maintained their connection through letters. Over time, their feelings for each other grew. A few months after the kidnapping, Barbara decided to write to Jim and tell him everything. When Jim learned about the horrors she had endured, he made a firm decision. He would be the one to help her overcome her trauma. Perhaps fate had heard her prayers. On December 18, 1974, more than a month after the kidnapping, Paul agreed to lead the police to the location where he had hidden the weapon used to kill Officer Charles Eugene Campbell and James Meyer. Sheriff Earl Lee and Special Agent Ronnie, Angel from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, escorted Paul. He was handcuffed and placed in a vehicle to direct the officers to the gun he had discarded after murdering the two men on November 16th. While driving down the highway, Paul used a paperclip to unlock his handcuffs, seized Lee's revolver, and attempted to fire through the holster. As Lee struggled with Paul to regain control of the vehicle, Ronnie fired 3 shots into Paul's chest, killing him instantly. Upon hearing the news, Dale, Beverly, and Barbara were overwhelmed with relief, knowing that their greatest fear had finally been eliminated. They were ready to embark on a new chapter of their lives. Barbara recalled moments when she had wanted to give up, but she realized that this was her life. She was living in her mother's home, a place filled with love. This house carried more beautiful memories than painful ones. With that in mind, she chose to stay and rebuild her life, for Beverly, for Dale, and for herself. She shared, "Every day of life, every moment of existence is precious. We can only discover its true value when we learn to cherish each moment, overcome hardships, and keep moving forward on our journey." Today's story is about a girl of breathtaking beauty named Manohara. At just 15 years old, she became the most beautiful princess in Malaysia. However, her life was far from a fairy tale. Instead, every night, she endured unimaginable pain, turning her life into a living nightmare. This dark and real-life story even came close to sparking an international dispute. Manohara's mother, Daisy, was Indonesian. She had once been married to a local man named Eddie, before remarrying an American named George Mans. On February 28, 1992, Daisy and George welcomed their daughter in Jakarta. This was Manohara. With an Indonesian mother and an American father, she held dual citizenship and carried mixed heritage. Even as a child, Manohara stood out with her refined and striking features, making her different from her peers. However, when Manohara was just 2 years old, her parents' marriage fell apart. Her father left, never to be heard from again. Her mother, Daisy, later remarried a German man named Rainer Pignot and had another daughter, Dewey. From then on, Manohara took on her stepfather's surname, Pinot. Due to her stepfather's work, Manohara's family moved frequently. They lived for 2 years in Hong Kong, 6 months in Romania, then moved through Austria, Switzerland, and England before finally settling in France. It wasn't until 2006, after the passing of Manohara's grandfather, that Daisy decided to take her daughter back to Indonesia. From an early age, Daisy recognized Manohara's extraordinary potential. She meticulously controlled her daughter's diet and invested heavily in the arts to cultivate her grace and demeanor. Daisy made sure Manohara attended high society events, allowing her to network with powerful figures. By the time she was 10, she had already blossomed into a stunning young girl, fluent in Indonesian, English, and French. Her striking appearance quickly propelled her into modeling, and she soon became a well-known face in Indonesia, gracing the covers of fashion magazines. At just 12, Harper's Bazaar ranked her among Indonesia's top 100 models. In December 2006, at the age of 14, Manohara received an invitation from Najib, then Malaysia's deputy prime minister, to attend a prestigious dinner in Kuala Lumpur. The event gathered high-ranking figures from the political and business elite. This was a defining moment in her modeling career, but it also marked the turning point that would change her life forever. At the event, the third Prince of Kelantan, Faris, was immediately captivated by Manohara's ethereal beauty. He fell for her at first sight, becoming infatuated in an instant. Malaysia consists of 9 states, with Kelantan being one of the hereditary monarchies. The sultans of these states take turns serving as the King of Malaysia in 5-year terms. Faris was the third son of the 28th Sultan of Kelantan. At that time, he was already 28 years old, twice Manohara's age. Far from the dashing prince of fairy tales, Faris had a rough and unrefined appearance, thinning hair, and an often greasy complexion. At the dinner, he carried himself with an air of elegance, but he was well known for his hedonistic lifestyle. His reputation as a spoiled playboy, lazy, reckless, and addicted to women, was widely acknowledged. Rumors swirled that he had been involved with hundreds, if not thousands, of women. To Manohara, however, none of this mattered. She had no particular impression of him, just that he was reserved and polite. The only thing that caught her attention was that he courteously helped her mother carry her handbag, which struck her as gentlemanly. They exchanged phone numbers, but Manohara gave him her mother's contact instead. To her, this was nothing more than a casual acquaintance. At most, if the prince visited Indonesia, he might call her for dinner with friends. Likewise, if she were in Malaysia, they might meet in a similar manner. But Faris saw things differently. He was serious, and this was no mere flirtation. The very next day after the banquet, he sought Manohara at her hotel and boldly declared his intention to marry her, insisting that she had no way to refuse. He even claimed that wedding invitations had already been sent and that the venue was prepared. If she rejected him, it would put the royal family in a difficult position. Faced with this coercion, Manohara firmly refused. In an attempt to persuade her, Faris promised that once they were married, she could return to Indonesia and continue her life as before. But no matter what he said, she would not agree. After repeated rejections, Faris resorted to force. In the dead of night, he broke into her room and violated her. Traumatized, Manohara immediately told her mother that she wanted to go to the police. Shockingly, her mother stopped her. Daisy warned her that they were in Malaysia, and suing a prince was nearly impossible. Worse, if they pressed charges, they might face serious retaliation from the royal family. Rather than fight back, Daisy urged Manohara to marry him. At that moment, Manohara had no idea that she was about to be pushed into an abyss, and the one pushing her was her own mother. It turned out that Faris had investigated Daisy and discovered that she was drowning in debt. Holding this as leverage, he paid off all of her debts in exchange for Manohara. However, at just 16 years old, Manohara was still underage according to Malaysian law and lacked the necessary documents from the Indonesian embassy. But for someone like Faris, this was no obstacle. Through a series of special arrangements, their wedding was grandly held on August 26th. In her innocence and lack of understanding, 16-year-old Manohara officially became a Malaysian princess. Her wedding sent shockwaves through the public, and she was quickly hailed as the most beautiful princess in Malaysia. But the dream she once imagined shattered immediately after the ceremony. Manohara had believed that she could continue her modeling career even as a princess. Instead, she found herself completely stripped of her freedom. On their wedding night, Faris cast aside his gentlemanly facade. He screamed at her, calling her a gold digger and claiming that women like her were a dime a dozen. He degraded her, saying she was unworthy of being a princess and should sleep on the floor instead. From that moment on, Manohara's life turned into a true nightmare. During the day, she was forced to smile, appearing at public events alongside her husband, portraying the image of a happy princess. But behind closed doors, she faced relentless psychological and physical torment. Faris treated her with no respect, constantly insulting her, comparing her to a luxury car, flashy but ultimately replaceable. He even declared that he could discard her at any time. The most horrifying part was that Faris forced doctors to inject her with an unknown substance. After being injected, she would lose all ability to move or speak, but remained fully conscious. She could see, hear, and feel everything, but could not fight back or call for help. Through her paralyzed body, she witnessed the sadistic pleasure in Faris's eyes. He took his time, savoring her suffering, as though prolonging her agony was what truly thrilled him. Those days made Manohara feel like she was worth less than an animal. She had no one to turn to for help. Everyone in the royal family knew what she was going through, but not a single person cared enough to step in. To them, as a wife, Manohara's only duty was to please her husband and bear his children. She had no right to resist. Living in constant fear, she could only sleep at 4 a.m., afraid of being drugged or injected with something against her will. To maintain the illusion of a happy royal couple, Faris frequently injected Manohara with hormones, causing her to gain 15 kilograms in just 2 months. His goal was to make the public believe she was living a blissful married life. Despite the abuse, Manohara tried to gather evidence. She hid her phone under the sink and secretly took pictures of her injuries. That very phone would later become the key to her escape. In February 2009, she attempted to flee to Singapore and return to Indonesia. Faris desperately tried to stop her but failed. To win her back, he bought her an expensive car for her birthday and invited her family on a pilgrimage to Mecca. However, once the trip ended on February 26th, Faris forcibly took Manohara away from Saudi Arabia, abandoning her mother and younger sister at the Mecca airport. After the incident, Manohara's mother, Daisy, publicly declared that her daughter had been kidnapped with the help of the royal family and urged the Indonesian government to intervene. By the end of April 2009, Daisy decided to hold a press conference, revealing the horrifying truth about Faris's abuse. She also accused the Malaysian government of blocking her entry when she tried to visit her daughter. Some members of the royal family, sympathetic to Manohara, confirmed that Faris did not treat her like a wife, but instead humiliated and tortured her. As the news spread, the Indonesian public was outraged. Protests erupted, demanding Manohara's return. Demonstrations even turned violent outside the Malaysian embassy in Jakarta. Despite this, both governments maintained that it was a private marital matter and refused to intervene. Finally, in May 2009, Manohara found her chance to escape. When Faris's father was hospitalized in Singapore for a heart condition, the royal family traveled there on May 31st with Manohara in tow. Upon receiving a secret message from her daughter, Daisy and Manohara's sister immediately flew to Singapore and rushed to her hotel. At the time, Faris was surrounded by 4 or 5 bodyguards. When he saw Daisy and her younger daughter, his expression darkened. He quickly ordered security to keep a close watch on Manohara. When she tried to leave the hotel, the guards blocked her on the 3rd floor. A passerby, an Indonesian staying at the hotel, approached Daisy and whispered that they had seen Manohara upstairs, but that she wasn't allowed to leave. Just then, The hotel's emergency alarm blared. Daisy and Manohara's sister sprinted to the third floor, where they found her sobbing, struggling against the bodyguards in the elevator. She clutched the emergency button, and when she saw her mother, she screamed, "Mom, don't ever let them take me away again." Singaporean police and the US Embassy quickly got involved. Negotiations lasted from 9 p.m. until 4 a.m. At first, Ferris refused to let Manohara go, but his lawyer warned that if he continued to hold her against her will, he could face legal consequences. Only then did he reluctantly agree to release her. With the assistance of the US Embassy, Manohara, her mother, and her sister made it to Changi Airport and safely flew back to Indonesia. Upon arriving in Jakarta, Manohara held a press conference, confirming everything her mother had said. She stated that during her time in the Malaysian royal family, she suffered continuous physical and emotional abuse. She also revealed that the royal family was fully aware of what was happening, but chose to remain silent. After enduring unimaginable pain, she declared that she would never return to Malaysia again. Manohara then underwent medical and psychological examinations. She announced that she would submit the reports to her lawyer to begin divorce proceedings against Ferris. On June 10, 2009, she handed over 16 photos to Indonesian lawmaker Roy Suryo. Forensic experts analyzed 10 of the clearest images, which showed bruises, burns, cuts, and injection marks all over her body, on her chest, back, neck, and thighs. Some marks indicated that she had been burned by unknown chemical injections. However, in an unexpected twist, Ferris was the first to take legal action. He sued Manohara for defamation against the Kelantan royal family and demanded $10.5 million, ringgit around $3 million in damages for reputational harm. Additionally, he ordered her mother to repay the debt he had previously cleared for her. Ferris vowed to use the law to restore his honor. Daisy, Manohara's mother, was no stranger to playing the game of power. She understood the immense influence of the Malaysian royal family and knew exactly how she had willingly married off her daughter. Seeing the situation escalate, she quickly backed down and took on the role of a mediator. She advised her daughter to drop the lawsuit. However, Daisy made it clear that they were prepared to face any consequences for defying the court's ruling. This included forfeiting any rights Manohara might have had to benefits from the Kelantan royal family. They also had no intention of repaying the debt Ferris demanded. In a surprising twist, Manohara's two fathers took opposite sides in the matter. Daisy revealed to the Indonesian press that Manohara's stepfather, who lived in Jakarta, fully supported her. Meanwhile, sources claimed that her biological father, George Mans, sided with Ferris Mans, who had never even met Ferris, wrote him a letter expressing his belief that the prince could take good care of his daughter and free her from her mother's influence. He even suggested he would seek U.S. State Department intervention, citing Manohara's American citizenship, to bring her back from Indonesia. Included in the letter were copies of Manohara's birth certificate and her first U.S. passport, clear, proof of his deep resentment toward Daisy. He recounted how, when Manohara was just 2 years old, his ex-wife took her away, leaving him in despair and eventually leading him down a path of alcoholism. Mans accused Daisy of being a perpetual liar, willing to do anything for money, and having a history of seducing men for personal gain. He also mentioned a bizarre discovery. During a dental checkup, he saw an X-ray that revealed a tiny metal implant in Daisy's chin. He claimed it was a traditional Indonesian charm inserted by shamans, believed to enhance beauty and attraction. As Manohara's case gained international attention, the media uncovered darker aspects of her mother's and stepfather's past. Before moving to France, Daisy had taken in a 14-year-old girl named Saliha from a small town in South Sulawesi. The girl was a distant relative, and Daisy had promised to send her abroad for education. But instead of fulfilling that promise, Saliha was turned into a domestic servant for Daisy's family for a decade. In April 2007, at the age of 25, she filed a police complaint in France, accusing Daisy and her husband of abuse, mistreatment, and coercion. Saliha testified that at first, Daisy treated her kindly, But things changed when her husband, Rainer Pinot, began showing an inappropriate interest in her. When she turned to Daisy for help, not only did she refuse to intervene, but she allegedly joined in the abuse. She also described Daisy as a manipulative woman who frequently borrowed money without repaying it. Eventually, Daisy and her husband were convicted in France. Rainer Pinot received a 4-month prison sentence, while Daisy was sentenced to 18 months. However, Daisy fled to Indonesia. Since there was no extradition treaty between the two countries, she never served her sentence. To this day, Daisy remains on France's wanted list. Furious at the accusations, Daisy denied everything. She claimed that Saliha's story was nothing but lies. According to her, she never treated Saliha as a servant, but instead took her on trips to many countries. She insisted that she had planned to enroll Saliha in school, but the girl refused to attend. Daisy also revealed a shocking detail. When she returned to France in March 2007 after 6 months in Indonesia, she caught her husband and Saliha in an intimate situation. She was devastated, as she had always considered the girl her own daughter. Saliha, overwhelmed with shame and guilt, left the house soon after. Before leaving, she cut her hair short and wrote a letter apologizing to Daisy, asking her not to look for her. In the letter, she even requested that her family be told she had passed away. But what Daisy didn't expect was that just a month later, in April 2007, she would receive a court summons from the local tribunal in Grasse, France. Despite her mother's notorious past, Manohara refused to let it define her. After escaping the Malaysian royal family, she took time to heal, but eventually returned to modeling. She didn't stop there. She ventured into acting and quickly regained her public image. Beyond the entertainment industry, she founded her own publishing house, actively engaged in humanitarian efforts, and became a passionate advocate for animal rights. She even ran for parliament, campaigning for environmental protection policies. In 2020, Manohara publicly converted to Christianity. In a predominantly Muslim country like Indonesia, this decision sparked widespread attention and made her the center of media discussions once again. However, she remained steadfast in her choice, vowing to continue fighting for women's rights and helping others who had suffered as she did. Manohara's life played out like a real-life fairy tale, but not the kind where the princess finds happiness with a prince. Instead, she proved that leaving the prince behind, through her own strength, she could still build a vibrant and fulfilling life. Reflecting on her painful past, she spoke with unwavering resilience. "I believe everything happens for a reason. What I went through made me who I am today."